Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio. Dennis Grove here with Kasper Zlowski. It's the 6th of November. That's right. We're right before the big one, UFC 205. We were literally packing our bags, about to get on the plane. Then I turn to Kasper and I go, wait a minute. How about Submission Radio? So we've put together a fun show for you guys this week. We've got some big guests in the world of MMA media and a first as well. Cass, how great is it to be getting ready for this huge spectacle event?
I am very excited. Unlike you, I am not even close to being packed. We are leaving in a matter of hours. By the time you guys listen to this, we will literally be in the air on the way to New York. So very exciting times. The monumental UFC 205 is just around the corner, and that is exactly what this show is going to be centered around. Of course, we will be talking about the Ultimate Fighter Latin America 3 finale just a little bit, just the top 3 fights with Damon Martin towards the end of the show, but majority of it is going to be focused on UFC 205. Sheehan, a name that many people know in the MMA community, of course, of severe MMA fame. First time on Submission Radio. It's been a very, very long time coming. Sean, of course, is Irish, as if everybody doesn't know that. So he's bringing the special Irish flavor here in a way that only an Irish person can. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be talking all things McGregor and UFC 205. The master himself, Robin Black, returns to Submission Radio. I haven't had him on for a while, but he's going to be doing some great breakdowns on the show. He's going to be after Sean and talking all things UFC 205, mainly the top 2 fights. And then Tommy Toehold, as has become customary on these big Submission Radio shows for big monumental events, he's going to be dropping by the show to get everybody excited for UFC 205. And then Damon Martin of Fox Sports rounding out the show. We'll be talking, like I mentioned, Ultimate Fighter 3 finale, and then UFC 205 predictions, all the goss, who's looking good, who's wearing what brand, what designer, all these things, and getting everybody excited. So it's a pretty sexy show.
Yeah. We might even try and get a Doctor Strange review from him. We know the movie's apparently be getting good reviews, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. Let's get to the bottom of that as well. But guys, quick reminder, because we know a lot of you listen to this show on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, or any other audio device. This is a warning to everybody. Go on YouTube right now and subscribe to the program, because when me and Kasper and the Submission Radio team get on the ground in New York, there's going to be a bunch of fun exclusive content coming to the channel that you'll miss out on if you don't subscribe right now. We're talking about interviews with coaches. We're talking about fun clips, breakdowns, a whole bunch of stuff happening. Who knows what's going to happen over there? We've got a crazy UFC media schedule. Plus, we have some sneaky plans on top. And unless you subscribe, you will miss out. So I will tell you right now, don't blame the maid. It's not her fault. Go on youtube.com/Submission Radio AU right now and subscribe, because you will miss out.
Yeah, those maids, they're always stealing shoes and asking for more lemon pledge, but all that exclusive, fun, sexy stuff you mentioned is going to be apart from all the usual stuff that we have when we cover events, like the weigh-ins, like the press conferences, like the scrums, pre-fight, post-fight, everything. Toilet cams, just kidding. Everything is going to be on the channel, and like Dennis mentioned, if you don't subscribe, you're going to miss out. So it's a great time. And like you mentioned, the people on iTunes and SoundCloud and Stitcher, if you are listening on one of those platforms, feel free to give us a review. We don't ask for much. I don't think we ask for anything. And we're not even asking. We're just saying, if you feel like it, if you can be bothered, jump on iTunes, give us a review. Why? Because it raises the profile of the program, especially here in Australia, but especially all over the world. iTunes looks at it and goes, wow, this is a good program. We're going to elevate it. We're going to promote it a little bit more. And it's good for us, but it's also good for you guys, because it helps the show and it helps us soar to higher planes. You don't even have to write anything, give however many stars you think we deserve, and that's pretty much it. But that's enough of our ramblings. There's going to be a lot more of that, where it came from. We're cutting to our first guest. I'm so excited, and Dennis, you're about to introduce him.
All right, guys, it's a pleasure to welcome our next guest for the first time on Submission Radio, an MMA writer for Severe MMA and Sherdog, co-host of Severe MMA podcast, Sean Sheehan. Welcome to the program for the very first time. I feel like this is a big moment for us. We're such big fans of everything that you do. Welcome to Submission Radio.
Thanks, lads. Thanks for having me. A big fan of you too. It's great to get on. I've been listening for a long time, and it's good now. Big fights coming up, so it's a good time to start.
We appreciate it. This is like in The Simpsons where Milhouse meets Milhouse, and they're like, "This is what it's like when doves cry." I feel like it's a very similar moment. Now, Sean, you mentioned the big fights. There are massive fights coming up. We're a week away from one of the biggest UFC cards of all time, UFC 205, of course. Tell us, what is the buzz like in Ireland right now, and how does it compare to sort of Conor's past fights?
I suppose the thing about Conor's MMA in Ireland in general and Conor's fights is at the start, and it's only like 3 years since the buzz has kind of started. At the start, there was nothing. You know, I remember the days back when I was the only person I knew in Ireland who watched MMA. I didn't know anyone else. And then it kind of got people heard of Conor McGregor, and he was on the Late Late Show, which is a big Friday night TV show here. And then it kind of just grew and grew, where it became huge and maybe too much for a while. But that has kind of become the norm now. He's in all, kind of the man blogs every day. He's on newspapers. He was on the front of a newspaper maybe 2 weeks ago. It's just huge, and it's becoming the norm. So I think it's very big, and it's always very big at the moment, to be honest. But when it comes around fight time, this week now, as it comes up to the fight, it's just going to get bigger and bigger. But I think the fact that UFC Belfast is coming up as well, the week after UFC 205, that just the buzz is actually probably bigger now than it ever has been. And it's not just the actual buzz for the fight, but the build of the buzz as well, the way MMA has built in the country. So it's going to be absolutely massive.
We were talking to Simon Head about this when Michael Bisping was fighting Dan Henderson, but I'm just curious, what's the situation like when, for example, Conor McGregor comes on in the main event? Because I'm guessing it's pretty late at night, probably early in the morning there in Ireland. Is everyone excited? Is it a situation where everyone's at the pub sort of having a beer? Or do you see a situation sometimes where it's too early in the morning, people might have work, people might have other things to do, and it's not as big of a situation as we picture in our minds?
I think it's different for a lot of people. I think now there's a lot more pubs kind of staying open or getting extensions and stuff where they can bring people in to watch the fights. I think in Dublin, I'm not actually from Dublin, but a lot of the places in Dublin do that. But you see a lot of people as well when it's a Saturday night, they might go out for the night, arrive back in flaming drunk about 4 o'clock in the morning and throw themselves down on the couch and watch the fights. But I think a lot of people as well maybe, go to bed, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and watch the fights. It's even going to be, I think, an hour later now this weekend, so it's probably going to be 7 a.m. So that's not too bad really, because people can go to bed, get a night's sleep and get up if they just want to see the McGregor fight. But for hardcore guys like me and a lot of people now, it's long nights, and we're kind of used to the long nights because it's the same every weekend. But I think people are getting used to it. We've always been used to it, even down through the years. That with boxing, with like Mike Tyson and Ricky Hatton, and even guys like Steve Collins. I know he fought a lot in Ireland, but Irish guys have fought over in America as well, and we're used to it. There's a long history of combat sports in Ireland. A lot of boxing fans around as well. So people love the big fight atmosphere, and if people say the casual fans just do it for McGregor 2 or 3 times a year, it's not that much, and it's kind of something special, I suppose.
And I mean, the great thing is that, with a McGregor fight, it usually brings with it a lot of Irish fans that make, the open workouts, the weigh-ins, and the fight night very memorable for the fans and everybody. How much of a sort of turnout do you expect for Madison Square Garden, especially considering how many sort of back-to-back events the Irish have had recently to sort of shell out for these McGregor shows? I mean, it kind of seems almost like they never run out of money.
Yeah, I think money is the biggest thing with this, because just the tickets alone are a scandalous price. I saw someone yesterday talking about, €800 for tickets on the secondary market that are not even great tickets, so that I think that's going to be the biggest thing. I think this is a good time for Irish people to travel, just before Christmas. A lot of people, maybe take the girlfriend out to New York for a weekend. She'd be loving it, and you can go to the fights and stuff like that. I think a lot of people are doing that, and maybe even maybe hoping to pick up a ticket there. But I think a lot of people already have picked up tickets, weigh-in tickets as well. I believe were for sale last week. I'd expect a very, very big crowd, and even. Okay, in the arena that on Saturday night, it might be tough for them to fill it out like they did in Las Vegas because of the house prices. But I think on the weigh-ins on the Friday, and if they have any open workouts or anything the day before, I think that could be huge. I think they could be the biggest ever, because people will go just to be there. You know, even if you don't have a ticket for the fight, I think there's a lot of Irish people going to be in America from Ireland, and also a lot of Irish Americans. You know, people living there. You know, we had a bad time of it here with the economy. A lot of people went to New York. You know, I've cousins and uncles in New York that have been there for years and years. So a lot of those people are going to turn up, and I think it's going to be unbelievable. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, you weren't there for the UFC 202 weigh-in. Your brethren from the Severe MMA were there, but it was a funny situation where they actually had the weigh-in in this room where nothing was bolted down and anyone could sort of go anywhere. So it was a crazy situation where Irish fans just going nuts and people were afraid chairs were going to get thrown and had some elderly security standing around that couldn't do anything. But that was mine and Casper's first experience at being at a weigh-in with Irish fans at a Conor McGregor fight. We've heard how crazy it was before, but it was just absolutely brutally nuts. And people were telling us, hey, this isn't even as crazy as it gets. What do you think it is about the Irish that makes them such passionate fans? Because obviously every country has their fighters, but you don't see half of Poland flying out to watch a Joanna fight or the English to watch Bisping. The Irish are essentially part of the story with every Conor fight. They're almost an entity of their own. I mean, us as media, we go over there and half of the time we're just filming some of their antics and they just get louder and louder. Would they have gotten behind any Irish fighter, or is it Conor because of just how he is?
I think it's a combination of two things. I think obviously McGregor we've never seen anything like him in MMA before. You know, he's the biggest selling, biggest drawing fighter of all time. But there's also the Irish fans. In any sport, they're always great fans. You know, if you go to any World Cups or anything, they're always named the best fans. I think the European Championships just gone, Irish fans were named the best fans. It's just, it's a thing. I think we appreciate it a little bit more because we're not great at stuff. You know, we don't qualify for tournaments that often. We don't win that many things unless it's golf, and no one cares about that. And we don't do that well. So when, England rob all our cricketers, we can't get a good cricket team. We can't, our soccer team is terrible. All players playing the first division, and when we get something good, we have one of the best fighters in the world now. So I think it's great to get behind him. I mentioned Steve Collins earlier. He packed out Mill Street in Cork. I don't know, like maybe 20,000-30,000 people. They had to specially fit out the arena to put him in there. When we get someone, we get behind him. Carl Frampton sells out in Belfast. It happens, when someone gets huge, they really get huge in Ireland. Everyone kind of gets behind him. There's a lot of people who begrudge him as well and don't like him and stuff. But, I think they're outweighed by the fans. And it's just a huge thing. Irish people, I don't know, you mightn't have heard, but we kind of like to have an old drink as well. And an occasion, they like to go out. So that helps as well, I think. And people, if they have any excuse to go to Las Vegas or to go to New York, I think they'll take it.
Yeah, any culture that has a strong drinking culture, we as Australians can definitely get behind. I'm wondering, though, how does Conor McGregor compare to, say, football players in terms of popularity? Because obviously here in Australia, we don't really know that, so forgive our ignorance here if the answer is obvious, but has he transcended sports in general over in Ireland? Is he known as just a fighter, or is he known as just, something bigger than that?
He's definitely bigger than that. Everybody knows him. You talk to little kids, they know him. You talk to a 70-year-old lady or a man, they know him. It's kind of the way things happen here. I mentioned the Late Show earlier on. Once you get on that, that's making it in one way. But with the way he's as I said, he's always in the papers. He's everywhere. Now comparing him to other people, obviously, like people maybe like Robbie Keane or Roy Keane back in the day would be better known than him. People have had them in their living room weekly for years. But I think McGregor, from a sport that people didn't know 3 years ago, people might never have heard of MMA or cage fighting or whatever you want to call it, are now coming and they see this guy. Oh, he's the guy. Who's Conor McGregor? If someone asks you what's the UFC, you'd say, the thing that Conor McGregor does. And oh yeah, I know that. I mentioned it before, and people are like disagreeing with me a little bit, but Conor McGregor is bigger in Ireland than the UFC is, because you can explain to someone what the UFC is, and they'll eventually know. But you can tell someone who Conor McGregor is, and they'll immediately know that sort of way. Now, wow. As I said, we have GA as well. It's big here. There's guys, like Colin Cooper and Dublin players and stuff like that who'd be huge in Ireland. Ty Kennelly went over to Australia playing Aussie rules and stuff. They'd be big here. They'd be, bigger names than him, on their time. But as sports people go, he's up there with all of those, I think. And just for people knowing him, he definitely is. Now, people, mightn't be able to tell you how to throw a jab or tell you how to throw a kick or something, but they'll know when Conor McGregor is fighting. They know stuff about him. So I think he definitely has transcended the sport in Ireland, and he kind of had to really to become that big, because the sport was big. UFC 93 happened and it sold out. There was 9,000 people there and it sold out in record time. Did a huge gate. So the fan base was there. But it was a fan base that, maybe could have sold that out a second time. It could have sold 18,000, maybe 20,000 tickets. But now they're talking about Croke Park Forum. I think it'd easily sell Croke Park. You could sell 80,000 more tickets to go to see a Conor McGregor fight now. And I think it is because of McGregor that we're in that situation.
Well, you mentioned Croke Park, so I got to ask you, Sean, huge fight, Madison Square Garden, but is a part of you a little bit disappointed this isn't the Croke Park show? The Croke Park Stadium show. I mean, it almost seems like the perfect matchup to do it there. And if this isn't there, do you think the UFC will ever have a show at Croke Park?
No, I don't. I think it's going to be very, very hard. I was talking to some people years ago about this, and they said if they could do it at night on pay-per-view time in America, it would be fine. But it's very hard. There's residents around Croke Park, and they're notorious, to excuse the pun, for not allowing people in there. There's 3 events allowed a year. They all have to be at a certain time of the year, at a certain time in the day. So I think you can kind of rule that out. As I was just saying, like the plan was before to maybe do a Fox card there, but McGregor just got too big after that. He's the pay-per-view king now, and if you're putting him on a card, you have to do pay-per-view. So you can't really do it there. Now, you have the Aviva Stadium as well, which I think is maybe 50,000 people, but you'll have, seats on the pitch and stuff as well. So you can call that 60,000 maybe. That could be a possibility. But I'd say it's unlikely as well. It's not just about having the card on time or having it as a pay-per-view card. It's also the media. Having it in America is huge. Now, they took Rousey out of America, obviously, as you know, they brought her to Australia, and she had a fight in Brazil as well. So it is possible, but I would say it's unlikely, to be honest, at this stage, just because of who McGregor is and how big he has gotten.
All right, let's talk, and that's probably the most honest answer we've ever gotten from any Irish person we've had on the show. So we appreciate the insight, Sean. Let's talk about UFC 205. We'll be giving our predictions on the show a little bit later on, but who are your picks for the 3 title fights of the evening? Let's start with Joanna versus Carolina. Who have you got winning that fight? How do you think it happens?
I was actually just finished off my preview for the card last night, so it's nice. Kind of it's stuck in my mind that this when you look at this on paper, you see Jedrzejczyk, who's a very go forward, technical, tight fighter, and then you have Kowalkiewicz, who is loose, can throws from the hip, good footwork, and gets in. But when you fight like Kowalkiewicz against someone like Jedrzejczyk, you have to get in and you have to get out. And there's a fatal flaw in her game that I saw, and if I saw it, Jedrzejczyk has definitely seen it, that she doesn't get out quick enough. She stays in the pocket, she holds there, and she's going to get hit when she does that. And if you get hit by Jedrzejczyk, it's going to be very, very hard, to win the fight. If you get hit in such a vulnerable position, and she does it all the time, if she gets hit a couple of times there, it's going to be hard the way Jedrzejczyk fights. But other than that, I think if she keeps it very tight and if she can sort out that problem that she has of floating in the pocket, I think she has a chance of beating Jedrzejczyk, because other than that, she's very, very good defensively, and that's a lot of the problem that Jedrzejczyk has. She's able to walk people down. I think she's going to find it hard to walk down Kowalkiewicz because of that movement. But once Kowalkiewicz is forced to come in, and if Jedrzejczyk is, if she's good about that and she lets her come in, doesn't chase her, she's going to have opportunities there. So I think Jedrzejczyk's going to hit her early. She's going to hurt her. I wouldn't be surprised if it went to a decision, because Kowalkiewicz will be safe on the outside. But I think it'll be a late stoppage for Jedrzejczyk.
Let's talk about the next matchup. And I mean, this is one that a lot of people leaning very, very heavily towards Stephen Thompson. I mean, Tyron Woodley's defending his title for the first time. A lot of people are not high on Woodley, even though he has had that amazing title win against Robbie Lawler. Where do you fall on this fight? Are you going with Stephen Thompson here, or do you see a way for Woodley to sort of shock the world once again and defend his title?
as many people know, I'm a big advocate of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I love his style. I think he's a very, very good fighter. And I think he will win here. He's a master of range. And how Tyron Woodley wins most fights is closing the range quickly. So if he can't do that against Wonderboy Thompson, I don't think he can win the fight. Now, that's the question. Can he do that? For me, he is probably the best person at closing the distance in the division. And Wonderboy, obviously, as I said, is the best at keeping the distance. So you have that's huge. Woodley can close the distance and he can hit him. But you're going to have to hit Wonderboy perfect. And I think he's going to have to knock Wonderboy out early to win the fight. The longer it goes, I think the more it favours Wonderboy. You could see Woodley playing a little bit of a game that's maybe careful early on. He'll obviously throw those big shots, but he mightn't throw them at a rate which he usually throws them. He's gonna know that Wonderboy is hard to hit, and he's gonna know he might have to be there into the 3rd, 4th, 5th round in this one to win it. So that it could be a little bit of cat and mouse early. Now, if Woodley does that, I think it's going to play against him because Thompson will pick him off on the outside happily. We saw that against Rory McDonald. That's exactly what Thompson did there. So he's stuck between a rock and a hard place, really, Woodley is. If I was advising him, if it was me in that position, I'd go for Thompson early. If you stand back waiting for Thompson, he's going to kill you. He's going to hit you all night, and that fight is going to end or it's going to go to decision. He's going to win. Woodley's best chance is try to close that distance against Thompson and try to hit him hard, try to knock him out. I think it's a good fight. It's going to be a good fight because of that. It's going to be cat and mouse early. One guy trying to catch another guy, one guy waiting for the other guy to tire and countering him. And I think Wonderboy will win out in the end.
It is an intriguing matchup. Now, you already know what's coming for the next prediction. I barely need to say it. Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. Who do you have going over, Sean?
Yeah, I have McGregor in this one, and I know I'm Irish and everything now, but I picked Diaz for the last one, so you can't hold it against me.
You'd be chased out of the country if you said anything, but...
I know, I got a lot of abuse for picking Diaz the last time, but I think this, like the Thompson-Woodley matchup, I think there's big areas in this fight where it's going to be won and lost, and I think there's two really big ones here. There's the clinch. If Eddie Alvarez can push McGregor against the fence, that's going to be huge. If he can take McGregor down from the clinch, obviously he's going to have a big advantage. If he can hold McGregor in the clinch, he's going to have a big advantage as well. So if McGregor can get his back off the fence, get out into open water, obviously that's going to favour him. Or if he can hit Eddie Alvarez with dirty boxing, or hit him with those McGregor elbows, as I call them, with the ones that Travis Brown throws as well. And McGregor has a knockout that way, so that could be an outside prediction for the fight in that way. But yeah, both guys, obviously, that's where Eddie Alvarez gets the advantage, and that's where McGregor can take away his advantage. The other area is, and I asked Eddie Alvarez about this on the conference call there the other day, it's when McGregor pushes him against the cage. When Eddie Alvarez has his back against the cage, that's a huge area for me. You can either see it like the Dos Anjos fight did, where Alvarez jumps out and he hits Dos Anjos with a counter and knocks him silly and nearly knocks him out. You could see Alvarez coming out, firing in the pocket and catching McGregor, or you could see him coming out and going for the takedown. But one thing that has to happen is he has to come out. If he stays there, and if McGregor can keep him there, McGregor can tee off on him from there. If he makes him a sitting duck, that's exactly what McGregor wants. Look at the knockouts. Dennis Seaver, that's exactly what he did. Push him against the fence, hit him, knocked him down, finished him on the ground. Chad Mendez, pushed him against the fence, hit him, knocked him down. Dustin Poirier pushed him against the fence, hit him, knocked him down. That's what happens. So Eddie Alvarez can't do that. Also, when he's fighting out, McGregor's countering is huge. Just like Jose Aldo, like Ivan Bushinger, they got knocked out with counter left hands. So Alvarez is in a very tough position there against McGregor. And that, for him, like McGregor against the fence, is the toughest part. So if Alvarez can fight out of there and get McGregor, stop McGregor's footwork, stop McGregor cutting off the fence, it's going to be huge for him, and it's going to be back out into open water where maybe it's a little bit more even, or where McGregor doesn't have a huge advantage. So I think those are the two main areas. For me, I think if I was looking at picking this fight, I think McGregor is the master of cutting off the cage. He's unbelievable at it. I think he's the best in the UFC at doing that. And I think Eddie Alvarez tends to fight off the back foot a little bit in recent times. Now, if he can't get McGregor against the fence, and if he does end up in that position, I think McGregor has the power to knock anyone with maybe apart from Nate Diaz out in the world. So, Eddie Alvarez is a great chin, very durable. But if you get yourself into that position, there's only so many shots you can take against someone like Conor McGregor.
It's going to be a fascinating fight, because every time I hear someone break it down, I'm like, oh, yeah, but maybe this will happen. And then they say something else. Oh, yeah, but maybe that will happen. So look forward to the predictions later on in the showcast. It's going to be interesting. But, Sean, let's talk about what happens next with McGregor. The main theory here is, this is what a lot of people have been talking about, is that the big announcement is that he's going to take a break for about a year, possibly have a child with his girlfriend. Is that what you believe the announcement is going to be?
Honestly, I don't know. A lot of people have asked me about this. And, usually in the position where I am, you'd hear these things. You'd hear exactly what's going to happen. You'd hear about injuries. You'd hear about people were going well. You hear how they're, what the plan is going to be. But I've heard nothing. No, there's been no whispers about anything. There was a report in a tabloid newspaper that was going to happen. And I think that's where a lot of it's coming from. But there's things online as well. And it could be true. Honestly, I don't know. And I wouldn't even like to speculate, to be honest. If he is, I think something is going to have to happen with the belts. If it's a year off, he'll probably have to give up both of them. But if it's, say, he's taken, till next summer off or whatever, I think he if he just wins the lightweight belt, and obviously that's going to be a big challenge against Eddie Alvarez. But if he does that, I think he should be allowed to hold on to that one and give up the featherweight belt and have the winner of Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis fight Jose Aldo for that belt early next year. That does another thing as well. It makes another big fight for him if he wants to go back down there. He's previous with Alvarez, previous with Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis. For me, if Anthony Pettis can become the featherweight champion and have McGregor as a lightweight champion, I think that's one of the biggest fights the UFC can make, because people know Pettis. He's on the Wheaties box a couple of years ago. Good looking chap. People like Anthony Pettis, and I think that's a huge fight for McGregor if it could work out. And obviously there's a lot of things have to happen for that to come out. But as I say, I think people are going to be tuned in on Saturday night as much to after the fight as they are to the fight to see what McGregor is going to say. But it's always a show with him, and he's a master of getting people to tune in.
We had Owen Roddy on and Dylan Dennis, and we spoke a little. We tried to get something out of them. They wouldn't really budge. But, I mean, the big worry here from a lot of fans is that Conor might announce his retirement from the sport after getting a huge payday. And if he wins, he's going to do something that no one's ever done before. And in a lot of ways, people are saying, hey, this is a perfect time to bow out and maybe go do something else. I know you don't want to speculate, but do you think there's a chance that happens? Do you think there's a chance after the fight, McGregor's got both belts on each shoulder, he's made a crazy amount of money, and now he wants to move on to something else and announces his retirement from the MMA and the UFC?
I'd be very, very surprised, to be honest. He lives for MMA and he loves it as well. Some people, you can tell, the Diaz brothers, they don't love it. They love martial arts and they love training. They love jiu-jitsu, but you can tell they don't love the fight. Nick Diaz has said it straight out. GSP, he doesn't love it. He said he was obsessed with it, but it, eats Eddie's head. And I think everything that happens for McGregor is good. He likes being on TV. He likes the attention. He likes fighting. He likes training. He likes working with the media and everything. And he likes the things, obviously, the rewards he gets from it. Obviously it's not all hugs and kisses. There's some bad things that come in it as well. But I just don't see it. Now, it's always a possibility, especially when, we're looking at the sport as well. And you have to look at it from, not only from maybe a personal viewpoint, but from, he say if he was having a family or, if he was getting married or something, you have to look at your future as well. This is a sport where you're taking blows to the head, where, he was choked out and badly beaten, 6-8 months ago. This isn't, if you're a millionaire, if you've 30 million in the bank, you want to, you want to enjoy that, and you want to have your full health to enjoy it. And at a certain point, and that point will come, where more money with maybe additional brain trauma isn't worth it. You know, there's a point come where he has enough money to not put himself in danger, and where he can turn around and leave it behind. He probably has enough at the moment to do that, but I think money likes company, and I think he's another while left in him yet, to be honest. But you know, anything can happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, if money needs company, then yourself, Sean, myself, and Dennis, we're always there for money. We're always there to be friends. Finally, before we let you go, if McGregor does take his yearly break, hypothetically, and does come back to the UFC, who would be the person that you'd give him on your return if you were playing matchmaker? I mean, you mentioned these guys just a second ago. Would it be, say, a third fight with Nate Diaz, or even a huge super fight with GSP if the UFC is able to, you know, get him to fight if he wins his return fight, whenever it may be?
I think McGregor's in a position where those fights that you just mentioned there are the fights he's going to be taking. You know, Tony Ferguson's a great fighter, and Rafael dos Anjos is a great fighter, but I can't see him taking on a challenger for a belt like that. You know, I think it's going to be. I mentioned Pettis there. If he was champion, could be him. Huge fight. Aldo rematch is a huge fight as well. You know, that's been building since it happened. And I know he knocked him out in 13 seconds, but I think a lot of people were kind of left with, you know, something wasn't right there. I remember I wrote a 3,000-word article for that fight, and then it's all finished in 13 seconds. Like, what, all the speculation I did for that fight, you know, and it's just all gone to putty. But that's another thing. GSP as well is a huge one. If he can get back in the UFC, you know, if he was to fight, you know, in the new year against Bisping or, you know, someone big like that, I think that's another huge fight for him. But, you know, there are a lot of options there. Nate Diaz as well, that third fight, especially if McGregor has a belt, you know, that's unfinished business there as well. So he has plenty of options. One great thing for McGregor, like Chael Sonnen as well back in the day, there's always someone's name in his mouth. Even Dos Anjos, he's mentioned him coming up to this fight. I think Dos Anjos has, you know, after, you know, the build up to his fight as well, has mentioned McGregor, and you know, there's always someone in his mouth. There's always a next person. There's a line of them. It could be Aldo. Edgar was mentioned. It could be Edgar. Could be Holloway. Could be Pettis. Could be GSP. You know, it could be anyone. You know, if he loses to Eddie Alvarez, it could be Eddie Alvarez. You know, you'd never know who it's going to be. But for me, I think if McGregor fights someone, and if it's after a layoff, it's going to be someone big. And if you're to push me on a name, I'd say George St. Pierre.
Now, Sean, before we let you go, just one last question. I wanted to ask you. You mentioned UFC Belfast before. How are you guys feeling about this card over there? I mean, a few injuries have forced the card to become a little bit different. Your new main event is now Gegard Mousasi versus Uriah Hall in a rematch, and a lot of people sort of looking at this as not with much significance to the Irish crowd. Also, Ross Pearson now takes on Stevie Ray, and I mean, we're experiencing this ourselves in Melbourne with Luke Rockhold being injured. How are the Irish fans taking to this, and is there still a bit of buzz for this fight night card?
There's not really any buzz, to be honest. I think with McGregor the week before as well, it's just people aren't even thinking. It's not even sold out. There's still tickets left for this. And last I checked, maybe 2 days ago. But the fact that, you know, when Gunnar Nelson was there in the main event, obviously he got injured. You know, we know there's a connection with SPG. Obviously, you know, he's a bit of an Irish accent. Even, you know, people like Gunnar Nelson. People know about Gunnar Nelson. You know, I spoke about those papers and kind of the man sites earlier on, and us, we do a lot of Gunnar Nelson coverage as well. And people in Ireland know him, but Gegard Mousasi and Uriah Hall, you know, you might as well have myself and you fighting. You know, people, you know, that's a good fight. I like that fight personally. I see a lot of fans saying that's a better fight than the other fight, which, you know, you could argue that way, but it's just, you know, it's not a draw. When they lost that card, I think they should have put Ian McCall and Neil Seery in the main event. They would have been better, to be honest. I think that's, you know, that's a good fight. You know, Neil Seery's last ever fight, putting him up there as well, just for the crowd that are going to be in attendance, because Neil Seery fights Ian McCall on the top of the preliminary card. You have 4 fights after that. Imagine if Neil Seery wins that fight, the crowd are going to go insane, and then you've 4 other fights. You know, you've Artem Alvarez there as well, obviously, who trains in Ireland. But I think it's going to be very tough. And the 4 fights, the Lobov Ishihara fight might be a good fight, and the main event might be a good fight, but they're not going to be blow-away fights, huge fights. It's on in Northern Ireland as well, and I'm very, very surprised they didn't get someone from Northern Ireland to be on this card. You have good guys, you know, Norman Park, I know he got released from the UFC. but he could have been on that card. You've guys like Reese McKee, Alan Philpott, good guys who are like Reese McKee, especially. I think he's definitely going to be in the UFC in the future. I think he's 3 or 4-0 at the moment. You've Alan Philpott, who's been around a long time. He's maybe 20 plus fights. Good, honest, solid pro. Definitely could have come in there and fought, and would have brought the crowd with him. But yeah, it's a disappointing card, I think. And in all honesty, the last two have been, if you look at the one where it was Paddy Hewlin against Lewis Smallcat in the main event. Now that was supposed to be Dustin Poirier against Joseph Duffy, and you had Stipe Miocic, and I believe was it Ben Rothwell or Arlovsky, but Stipe definitely was supposed to fight someone in the co-main event, and both of those fell out. So Ireland's getting hit hard at the moment, and it's such a hotbed for MMA in Dublin, especially. I know this card is on in Belfast, but Dublin especially is a huge hotbed for MMA. A lot of BAMA cards going on there. Cagers are going to be coming back next year. So I think this is a missed opportunity really for the UFC, but with these cutbacks and with the planned lessening of the schedule next year, we might have to put up with it. It might be the last one we see for a while.
Yeah, well, hopefully if that's the case and they're doing less shows, hopefully the shows they do are a little bit more stacked. At least that's sort of the hope here. Well, there you go, guys. You heard it here from Sean Sheehan himself. Make sure to follow Sean on Twitter at SeanSheehanBA. That is at SeanSheehanBA. A lot of comedy gold and great tweets from him. And listen to him on the Severe MMA podcast every single week. A great show for everybody to check out. Sean, it's been a long time coming. I'm glad you did it. Thank you so much for jumping on the program. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, lads. I'll talk to you.
Hi guys, it's Joanna Jedrzejczyk, UFC strawweight champion. Listen to Submission Radio.
All right, guys. Our next guest is one of the great analysts from the Fight Network, a former fighter himself. He is known for his high energy and, of course, Robin's breakdowns. He is Robin Black, and he joins us to break down UFC 205. Robin, we've missed you. Welcome back to Submission Radio.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. It's going to be super fun to hang out and talk about fights.
Yeah, let's hang out. And I mean, there's a lot to discuss and not a lot of time to do it. So for the sake of time management, we're going to focus on two fights, the main and the co-main event of the evening. First up is Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson for the welterweight strap. People look at Tyron Woodley's strength and they see wrestling and huge knockout power. However, Wonderboy is known for his ability to control distance, which, as we all know, can negate a lot of fighters' biggest tools. Do you think one of the biggest keys to this fight will be who can control the distance?
Yeah, for sure. That's the game. That's the Wonderboy game. And nobody's really figured it out. Matt Brown kind of figured it out and beat him up pretty good. But that was just the use of pressure. And, in retrospect, that was a big, important fight for Wonderboy to lose, to experience that, and to really understand the level of pressure that some of these guys can bring. And so he changed, his circular footwork. He's very misleading, too. It's not just that he's controlling range, but he's making you misunderstand range. He disguises movements of his feet in with certain punches and feints that he uses. So he's very tricky to deal with, and nobody's figured it out, really. And I talked to Duke Rufus, and, a couple months back, and he was super pumped about it. Duke's brother, Rick Rufus, was, Duke and his brother, Rick, among the best long pant karate-style kickboxers of their era. And he was going to bring in Rick and their father, and their whole family was going to try to look at solving this puzzle with their experience. And I can't wait to see if they have,
Absolutely. Now, I want to ask you this. If Woodley can close the distance and he can get on the inside of Wonderboy, what do you think happens? How much trouble do you think Thompson is in? Is that, I don't want to say game, set, match, but is that the big difference maker? Or do you think the battle isn't over yet for Woodley?
Well, we've seen people get in. That's the problem for Woodley. I mean, yes, Woodley's a great wrestler, and he's a powerful guy, and he's a super intense. The way he expresses energy is like high intensity, but Hendricks got in. Hendricks got in and got deep, and Thompson did the work. He's been working with Weidman. You got Weidman, a bigger, stronger wrestler every day that he's dealing with. So I think for Woodley, it's going to be the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh efforts. Just because people haven't gotten a hold of Wonderboy, what do? Go up? I guess we're not going to get ultimate. I give up. No, you find the answer, and that answer, among other things, the Matt Brown era, Wonderboy was tenacity, and Woodley has that. But do you push? You got to understand when you're in on a takedown, when is the right time to bail. When's the right time to say, okay, I'm using a ton more energy than he is? Woodley he's kind of an anaerobic athlete, so he uses recovery time, active recovery between these bursts. So you've got to identify when is the time that I'm burning too much energy and give up on it. And where you normally give up, you double down a little bit. It's risky, it's particularly if it gets to be a longer fight, but you drive, grind, and just commit to it. It's a tricky one because that's a risk, but that's the game. With Stephen Thompson, either you're going to go in and push to risk, and sometimes risks turn out, or you're going to stay back. And we know if you stay back, you get eaten alive by him.
A lot of people said, Tyron shocked them at UFC 201 when he quickly knocked out Robbie Lawler. I mean, a lot of people expected Lawler to win that fight. A lot of people said he looked like a different fighter and has evolved tremendously. What do you think, Robin? Are you buying it? Is this a completely different guy compared to the one that faced Kelvin Gastelum last year?
Yeah, not really. I mean, he's definitely going to evolve. He's a very intelligent guy, very, very smart guy. And smart guys have the ability to acquire new knowledge and acquire new training systems and really not just improve a skill somewhere here or there, but level up their ability to learn. So that's something that these guys, you see suddenly, it's not a coincidence that Daniel Cormier, Dominic Cruz, Mike Bisping, and Tyron Woodley. These four guys are all champions, and they all sit at a desk and watch fights and analyze fights and take a third-person perspective, something they never did before in their life. Is it a coincidence all four of them are champions? No. It's because the act of studying other people fight made these men better fighters. So you can't underestimate how good Woodley could be between fights. There's no doubt this man will have improved, but he's built a certain way. He's a certain kind of athlete, and these athletes that are built, he's got fast twitch muscle, that kind of red muscle fiber that creates a particular type of athlete. Sprinters and track, 100-meter runners and hurdlers and wrestlers, and he is that. That is what he is. So you can't make him Wonder Boy. You can't make him Conor McGregor, and you can't make him what he isn't. But what he is so powerful, you want to build around that. So what we've got is a powerful, explosive, compact, fast-twitch muscle, powerful wrestler striker. That's a reality. Who's become highly intelligent. That's a reality. And who has a coach who believes that they can take this athlete and his strengths and put together an answer. That's a cool story, bro. But we got to see it happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why these fights are so great. That's why a fight like this is so great. I'm interested. I love Duke. I think he's a brilliant man. I think I love talking to him. You chat about with this guy, you see what level his mind is on. I love the idea of him and his brother and his father sitting together in the kitchen, the lab of their kitchen somewhere, crafting a plan, how they're going to train him, how they're going, how they're going to get reads on him, what they're going to do about certain movement, and then executing that in the gym. I love it. Like I said, cool story, bro. But we got to see it happen. So that's why you have to watch the fight, And at the same time, Stephen Thompson's going to have improved as well. He's also highly intelligent. We're at the era now of the intelligent athlete. If you want on a level of intellect of some of these top guys, you can't be beating them.
I love the sort of comparison and the theory there, Robin, that you just put out, how these guys are champions and they all sit behind the desk. I love it. With all the breakdowns you do, I feel like we might be seeing a second coming of Robin Black with all the millions and millions of hours you spent, doing your own studying.
I'm infinite. I was a very, very low-level fighter. So, very, very low-level, came to it later. I'm an infinitely better fighter than I was then, but I still would be below UFC level. I can assure you of that. But I am definitely, the understanding, the study of this, it has to make you better. It just has to, things that you now know. But fighting is about executing too, and that was where I was weak, was the ability to go in and be able to do this. There's something, among the reasons I'm such fans of some of these top guys, is I've been in that situation and understand how overwhelming and terrifying and how you cannot necessarily do the things you know how to do in that setting. So I admire the guys who do it because I know how challenging it is. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it always hits me. My best fight ever was my last fight, by far, infinitely better than all the other ones. The idea strikes me that I would love to fight some other old guy one more time and get a 10th fight. But the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty low. I spend 50, 60 hours a week doing this. It makes you smarter, but, I got a beer belly now, so it's highly unlikely.
Well, if there's ever a Robin Black fight, then maybe we can do a preview breakdown for it and give you a break from having to do that on Fight Night. But let's quickly get back to this fight. I mean, a lot of people favor Wonderboy and believe that UFC 205 will see a new welterweight champion crowned. But I'm wondering, Robin, are there any habits or things about Thompson that you believe Tyron can use to his advantage? Because we talk a lot about how Thompson, has all these tools. But what do you think Woodley can use to his advantage here?
Well, the challenge is when you haven't seen anybody have successes, there's not a lot of successes to study. So that's the trick. And then, it's the short answer is the big footwork, the big movements of your body throughout space can be beaten by small movements. If you take your hand and you move it in an arc and just move it in an arc in front of your face, and you put a little dot, and imagine a dot below it, how do you cut that arc off? You don't have to move with that arc. You move on an angle to intercept it. So the plan, undoubtedly, that Duke and his brother are working on is about the proper way to corner and intercept that arc of movement. It can be done, but you don't get to find out the answer until in real time. And they brought in Sage Northcutt, and that's cool, but that's just partly story. As much as you've got it, yes, he does karate, and yeah, he's very mobile and stuff, but it's really not all that similar. It's a tough one, man. Like, I study these things. This is what I do. This is my passion. It's what I love doing. And when you've got somebody like Thompson or Dominic Cruz, I'm all the more interested in doing it. And the problem is, the more you learn about these guys, the more power it gives them in some ways. Like, if you get in and you start to try to anticipate what Dominic Cruz is doing, he has an answer for your anticipation. You know what I mean? You're going down a road where you think, okay, the answer is this. He and Stephen Thompson have outthought that answer already and have a trap for it. You know what I mean? That's the level we're looking at with guys at this elite level. That's what Conor believes is something he can do too, and he has done it before. There is an answer for you in every setting. Everything has an answer. I'm going to get off track here, but bear with me. Dwayne Ludwig, I was at a seminar that he was doing, and one of his things that I've heard him say there and in other settings is, our technique is perfect. The only flaws that anyone will see will be flaws we want them to see. Now, if you think of that theory, why would I want somebody to see that my right hand is well? Because I want them to throw a left hook on me. If I want them to throw a left hook on me, I do it because I'm prepared to counter that left hook. It's really that simple, right? That is some of the simple dynamics that's happening within a fight. Now, there's a hallway that you will push somebody down. So as Dominic Cruz moves out in a certain way and you have the answer, you will start moving down that hallway of the answer. He's fucking set traps all down that hallway because he knew you were going to eventually find it. And the reason you found it is because he wanted you to. That's what we're dealing with Stephen Thompson too. You know what I mean? Which is so crazy cool, right? Like, the more you study this, you're like, oh shit, that's the answer. Oh shit, he wanted us to think that's the answer. And now he's already he's got a pre-prepared answer for your answer. And in Cruz's case, it would not surprise me one bit if he's been intentionally leaving something out there that a young guy could look at and go, I think I got the answer. It's like, oh, cool, somebody fell into this trap. Awesome. Like, this is the level we're working at. Woodley is smart. Woodley is super smart. Duke is super smart. They understand all of that, but you got to go out and do it. So it's possible. I love the story, but nobody and who might be able to do it, an incredibly highly intelligent athlete who can execute like Woodley, coached by a guy like Duke. So it's possible, but I got to see it,
Well, what's the breakdown here? I'm sorry, not the break. What's the prediction? I feel like I can sense who you're leaning towards. What do you think is going to happen in this fight? How do you think it ends? Or whose hand is raised?
Gun to my head, and I think I've told you guys this. I could go on for hours about how crazy making a prediction is. The more you learn, the more variables you learn. I'm studying chaos theory right now, which is a way to make sense of chaos. There's actually math to it, and it's really interesting. But you go down these things and you see all these variables, and one thing, it's like, oh my God, turns out Tyron Woodley comes out southpaw. Everything you've imagined is different. Everything you may have laid out or studied. So predictions are pretty crazy. It's a mechanism that's fun to create conversation, and we do it in television and in radio and podcasts. We do it, and it's cool, but it is what it is. But having said all of that, prefaced with all of that, I'm having a hard time seeing them beat Wonderboy. I really am. Would I be blown away to see Woodley get in on a takedown or two, Wonderboy get back up, which blew me away when he did that with Hendricks and when Ellenberger couldn't get in on him. Would it blow me away? And then, you see him dance around outside and slowly pick him apart. No, that's what I would picture. But would I be surprised to see and happy to see Duke and Tyron pull it off? Yeah, that would be super cool. But I'm leaning towards Woodley. Nobody's found that answer yet, and I'm not sure even if you find it, you're not just finding something he wants you to find,
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't take into fact as well the strong mental game that Wonderboy has. I mean, the guy looks like he's very sure of himself, and in difficult situations, you can see he has a lot of belief in his skill. But let's move on, because we want to get to this McGregor Alvarez breakdown. Before we ask you your thoughts on it, Robin, we want to ask you about the Sapp Alvarez scale from your breakdown. I mean, it was a genius invention. I feel like this is something Year 10 students are going to start learning here in schools all across Australia to help them understand math a little bit better. But you got to tell us, how did you come up with it? And be honest with us. Did other names cross your mind before you settled for Bob Sapp?
Oh, thank you. First of all, I'm really proud of that. Like I love this work. I love doing it. Like, it's not like I'm out there trying to figure out how to do my job. Like, this is what I would do. Like this one, even the UFC had a budget freeze, so I do these for the UFC usually. And they're like, yeah, we might have to hold on one or two until we get all this thing sorted out. I'm like, that's irrelevant. I do this. You know what I mean? Whether I do it here or there or for my own pleasure, I'm glad people like it. I'm glad people are entertained. But yeah, I'll probably do the next one, presumably for the UFC, but I would do them on my own in my house. So it's what I love to do. But I'm really glad, and thank you for the kind words about it. I think it started with Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez in 2014 was coming into the UFC, and he's always one of my favorite fighters. The urgency and the spirit, of Eddie Alvarez. And so I wanted to do something, and I just started down that road of trying, so it started with, how do you break down attributes? Because people will say to me, hey, a fight breakdown is X, Y, and Z. It's like, motherfucker, I'll tell you what a fight breakdown is. You know what I mean? To me, sometimes fight breakdowns are about story. They're about emotion. Sometimes it's storytelling. Sometimes it's physiological. It's not just how you slip your head off a line and count. I'm bored of that shit. I'll circle back to that, I'm sure, in a few weeks or months, or I'll find other layers with it. But, fight breakdowns didn't exist 3 years ago when a very small few of us were doing it. And they didn't get made because we were going to stay the same forever. It's going to the leg kick here and the spatial manipulation there and land the overhand right on the rhythm. Like, it's not a technique breakdown. It's a fight breakdown. That fight breakdown may be about, preparation. It might be about my breakdown of Lawler going into it was about how he learned from losing. Like, so to me, the idea was it's not a technique breakdown. That is one of 6 or 7 things that may exist when you break down a fight. So I started thinking, how do you break down intangibles? And I started thinking about definitions, and maybe I could tell the story of whatever. And suddenly I'm like, well, if there was like a scale, if there was some type of comparison point, Eddie Alvarez would be at the top, and I started trying how could you, are there scores? Like, trying different things. And suddenly somehow Bob Sapp just popped up. And because I'm like, well, what would the opposite of Eddie Alvarez look like? And then boom, it was. And I had just recently seen Bob Sapp like tapping out to a takedown or something, because we have so much around Fight Network. We're absorbing, seeing, fighting 24 hours a day. So then it started, and then it was Bob Sapp. And here's the thing. When I first made it in 2014, so this new one, I looked at all the things, the new knowledge and the new learning, because you're supposed to learn as time goes on. If you think you're really smart, you're fucked. You have to think that you're a blue belt, and that way you'll keep trying to become a black belt. You're not smart, you just have some information you gathered. And I gathered a whole bunch of new information about how they change and how these attributes in fighters can change and how fighters themselves change and so forth. And I didn't get to it in this one, but I really wanted, so I edited out a part of it. And the part was that Dominic Cruz is actually Bob Sapp too. Now, his motives are entirely different, but he's a -10. He's entirely risk averse. And he doesn't want taking damage to Adonis for chumps. Stupid people would take damage. And that's how he sees it. And he's not wrong. And so motivated by never getting hit and and never taking damage. Dominic Cruz created this entire brilliant, beautiful, magical, evolution of the martial arts tree. And so it could be the Cruz Alvarez scale, easily. But Bob was fun and entertaining, and he's such a neat character. And, I tried to do it lovingly too, like as much as it's like, hey, look, I tried to say, don't judge him. There are a million ways to live your life. And this guy traveled the world and he didn't want to get hurt. And, that's all right. It is what it is. So it was a weird, loving tribute in a way to Bob Sapp. But I'm going to restudy it with Dominic Cruz in the future too. But I really enjoyed doing it. I love doing it. And I hope Bob Sapp's not mad.
No, I feel like decades from now, this will be a standard scale. Years after people even know who Alvarez is and Sapp is, they'll just be like, oh yeah, it's the Sapp Alvarez scale. We've only got a few minutes left with you, Robin, so we'll try and do somewhat of a breakdown of this Conor McGregor Eddie Alvarez fight. Before we talk about Conor, let's start with Eddie Alvarez, and this is kind of like one of the X factors you mentioned before. He's obviously the underground king. Most of his best and most exciting fights took place outside of the UFC. We did see him stick to a very disciplined game plan against Anthony Pettis, and he said many times that the key to beating McGregor is obviously the wrestling. The Dos Anjos title fight saw him revert to the classic Eddie and going guns blazing. Do you think he actually utilizes the grinding, grappling game plan against Conor, or is it a bluff? And even if he does, do you think he can do it effectively for 5 rounds?
Oh, that's the trick. I think Eddie does. I listened to him chatting today, and I purposefully do not believe the words that athletes say, because smart ones would lie for their opponents' ideas, for the public, for many reasons. But I heard an inkling of something that wasn't intended as, a quote, just his insight, that even if he makes McGregor think about the wrestling, he believes that McGregor's defenses are not sound. And so if McGregor slips into Chuck Liddell's game, was if you're thinking it's a wrestling match, that's when I knock you out. And that included if Chuck was, going to just engage you in wrestling. There's a moment where you're still in wrestling mode and Chuck is punching you in the head. And it's really a simple concept. And I think Eddie thinks that's something that can happen. But I think once it gets going, McGregor does generate incredible power. The efficiency in how he does it, it's unique. It's one in millions of one in millions, because it takes 1 in a million to even get to the UFC or to get to this level, and it's rare ability to generate power like that. Duo Choi kind of has it too. It's very interesting. And one day maybe they'll fight. But I think Conor's right that once he starts to stress Eddie, especially if it turns out that he's correct and he can be countering Eddie and doing different things kind of to unsettle him. If he can do that, I think then Eddie, he's right to expect Eddie to turn to the wrestling then. It's a great fight, man. These are two of the great fighters ever. And not everybody wants to hear that about McGregor because he has the ability to make people hate him. That's a superpower. It's made him rich. But it's true. They are two absolutely brilliant fighters. One thing I don't love when I hear Eddie sort of try to dismiss the idea of how good Conor is, because you don't want to find out you're wrong about that in the middle of a fight. But even if that's the case, Eddie Alvarez has been everywhere and done everything, so he's in this thing. And if he gets Conor down, does some punishing, he's going to start feeling pretty good.
The interesting thing to me about this fight is, Rob, and that a lot of people have said for a long time, in order to beat Eddie Alvarez, you can't rush in on him because he, like you mentioned in your scale, he loves those moments of adversity where he's in the pocket just throwing and he outlasts most people. But when I hear Conor McGregor talk, he mentions that, Alvarez has taken a lot of punches and he's very punchable. And to me, it almost sounds like he wants to go into that pocket with Eddie Alvarez and prove he can knock him out and outlast him in that adversity. Do you believe he's going to have a Nate Diaz-like style where he's going to go forward and try to throw bombs and knock Eddie out from this outset of the fight? Or do you think he's going to have a more strategic game plan that we've seen him use before, where he's going to stay on the outside, like a lot of people have suggested, in order to beat Eddie Alvarez, use leg kicks, use his distance, use his reach, and avoid that moment where, you end up in a pocket with Eddie Alvarez who's trying to throw bombs?
Yeah, I think that's the plan. And you saw him really figure that game out against Nate Diaz in the second fight. He didn't get hit much, and that's pretty good. Like, hey, man, like Dominic Cruz said, getting hit's for chumps. Actually, I don't know if he ever said that. I may have just pushed that on him all of a sudden. But you don't want to. Getting hit isn't the game. Hitting you and not getting hit is the game, and that'll work way better from the outside. And he'll be trying to move his feet and be on different angles, commit to his power. And that's one thing I kind of touched on. I personally think that Conor McGregor has a very sound, intelligent defensive game. He just dismisses your power sometimes and says, for if you want to commit fully to a brutal, it's close to 100% of your exertion of a shot, smooth exertion of a shot that you want, sometimes it'll leave you in range an extra second or two. Or milliseconds or two. And that's why he would get hit with counter right hands. And he knew that, he was aware of it. He kind of talked to me about it in Vegas once. And, but that was something he was willing to do. He didn't think they could hurt him. He was tough. He liked there was something about getting hit that didn't bother him. I don't think he's going to do that ever again. I don't think he's going to play that way anymore. Diaz made him realize staying in range, I think, is not the way to do this. And, we talked about Dom. We just talked about Wonder Boy, his likelihood. This is a similar kind of thinking this guy plays, and this is the game now. And realistically, as much as Eddie's one of my very favorite fighters, and I love Tyron Woodley, and I would love to see either or both of them do their thing and win the fight. But they represent something that was. They represent an element of a combination of mixed martial arts that was dominant. It was Matt Hughes, and it has been dominant for a long time. And in fact, Bruce Lee felt, way back then with no fights to study, that a lot of the traditional martial arts would be beaten by the right combination of wrestling and boxing, and he turned out to be right. And for the very first time, just now, we're starting to maybe, because he's predicted exactly everything we've seen. If you go back and study Bruce Lee's work, he was able to see exactly where we are and exactly where we've been. And we may be now, for the first time since the 70s, where that man passed away, able to look at something beyond what he saw was going to likely to be the evolution of sport. Because it doesn't end with the wrestler boxer, well, we figured it out, this is it forever. You go back, and the game itself, the art itself, studies and evolved to beat that. And that's what Wonder Boy represents right now. That's what Conor McGregor believes he represents, and I think he may. And that's what Dominic Cruz does, although he's also incorporated a level of wrestling that's beyond comprehension. He's an unreal wrestler. So, and that's great. But just like what we learned, the radio became outdated when the TV came along, which is now outdated by our cell phones. And if Wonder Boy or whoever else is the answer right now, he'll eventually become the radio as the next thing comes on. It happens forever. And that's why fighting will be the coolest thing forever, and I'll be obsessed with it forever, because this will never end. This goes on, and it will go on again. Wonder Boy might be the answer right now. It won't take long for people to find the answer to him, and the technology of how that happens speeds up. So the answers are being found even quicker now, and they can be found within one fight. So it's amazing. These are two fucking unreal fights that I can't wait to see.
Robin, we're not going to ask you for a prediction for this one, because I feel like this is just a fight that everybody just needs to tune in and watch and enjoy. The last question I want to ask you, and then we'll let you go, is if this fight goes into the later rounds, if there's no quick knockout, and if in rounds 4 and 5 these guys are still going, who do you think it favors based on what you've seen from both men?
I think it favors Eddie Alvarez a year ago, and I think now it's probably still pretty even. And that experience of that 5-round Nate Diaz fight, man, that he can carry. McGregor brings that in with him. Plus, he believes in science, this guy. And, I talked to Coach Kavanaugh, and they're like, I'll be training him and say, what's your heart rate at right now? And McGregor will say 155, and they'll measure it. It'll be 154. You know what I mean? His understanding. He is obsessed, like he says. He's obsessed. There's answers to everything. There are answers to everything. Those answers require more work. You don't have the ability to do more work. He figures out how to do more work, optimize himself so he can study this and add it to the thing. That's what you're watching. And that bothers some people. Some people love him because they're inspired by the idea that it's like, hey, yeah, it turned out I had this weakness. So I've spent time to figure it out, study it, attack it, and beat it. What that tells us is we're all capable of that. All of us can do that. And some of us see that and go, that's cool. That's more evidence that I can do those things and I can grow constantly. Other people look at that and go, that is proof that whatever my life is right now is my own doing, and I don't like that. Fuck you, Conor McGregor. I hate you. You know what I mean? But it's real. So I suspect the improvements he's made in those areas because I know what he's done. I've studied what he studied, and it's real. So he is better in round 4 and 5 than he's ever been. He's had enough to deal with Eddie Alvarez, who's one of the great, show-up-and fighters ever and can draw from and stuff. We'll find out. But he's in a lot better state than he was 6 months or a year ago.
Well, there you guys go. One of the most unique guys in the sport when it comes to analysis and breakdowns. Robin Black, thank you so much for joining us on Submission Radio. We know how busy you are, guys. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Robin Black MMA, and make sure to catch all of the action on Fight Network where Robin Black holds court and lets everybody know exactly what's going on. We can't wait to see some of your coverage. Robin, thanks again for coming on the program.
Cheers, guys. Thanks so much.
Hey, everybody. This is Tyron, the chosen one, Woodley. You are listening to Submission Radio.
What's up, fight fans? I'm the PewDiePie of mixed martial arts, Tommy Toehold, and UFC 205 is less than a week away. In less than a week, Conor McGregor is either going to hold 2 belts, or he's going to be holding 1 belt, and his next fight's going to be against Michael Bisping for the 185-pound title. It's gonna be fucking nuts, and here are 5 reasons you should be jacked. 1, this whole card kicks ass. You know how much ass this card kicks? There is 1 fighter. Just 1 that doesn't have a Wikipedia page. Everybody else on the prelims is a headliner easily on a UFC Fight Night Tough 83 finale in Sheboygan, Michigan. There are 8 current or former champions on this card. There are 3 fucking title fights. And for once, a 6-fight fucking main card doesn't have 2 fights that are guys competing from the Ultimate Fighter that I've never heard of. Number 2, most of these fights are probably gonna last about a round, but like a really great round that ends with something you've never seen before, like a flying, spinning go-go plata into an armbar 5-star frog splash. Not one of those main events is going the distance, no fucking way. Even with 3 title fights, this card's gonna last like 12 fucking minutes. Number 3, we will for at least 30 to 40 minutes of the broadcast get to hear Mike Goldberg desperately trying to consistently say Joanna Jedrzejczyk or Karolina Kowalkiewicz in any manner that is remotely close to their actual names. Number 4, there are at least 6 fights that I'm not sure what the fuck to expect in any way, shape, or form, but I know it's gonna be fucking awesome. What happens when you put Chris Weidman and Yoel Romero into a cage together? I don't know, maybe Weidman KOs Yoel? Maybe Yoel slams Weidman into another dimension? Maybe they do a choreographed dance to Michael Jackson's Thriller? Nothing's better than a whole card full of mystery. It's like a fucking J.J. Abrams movie. And the biggest reason I'm psyched about UFC 205 is because the stakes are so fucking high for Conor McGregor. Every single fight he ups it to levels I can't even understand, and he just keeps surpassing it. His career is like watching a Jenga game the size of a city with millions of dollars at stake every single fucking time he moves a piece. There are title stakes in MMA, and then there are I compared myself to a god and I'm the greatest fighter who's ever lived stakes. Conor has to win next Saturday. If he doesn't, he'll see it as a total failure. Everything he's accomplished so far, he'll look at as total shit. You can't buy stakes that high in sports. This shit is gonna be stupid intense. I'm gonna wear like 7 different shirts because every one of them is gonna sweat through, and I can't fucking wait. I'm Tommy Toehold. Back to you, my Aussie friends.
That is hilarious. Awesome. Thank you so much to Tommy Toehold right there. And rest assured, we'll be taking the memo, taking a bunch of black shirts when we go to UFC 205. For those who don't remember Submission Radio a couple of years back, there was the Sweatgate or Patchesgate disaster of 86. And if you haven't seen it, then don't bother looking it up because you can't find it anymore. Don't forget to follow Tommy on Twitter at Tommy Toehold. Of course, check out his YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tommy Toehold. And of course, go to his website, ThS.com, where you can buy a whole bunch of merchandise with his face on it. We are massive fans of Tommy Toehold. Everything that he does, his cartoons, his shows. He's got a podcast also called Bushido Talk, so make sure to check all that stuff out, and we really appreciate everything that he does for us, all the love that he's constantly given us. He's like a gem. Literally probably pound for pound the nicest guy in MMA, so we really appreciate it. But from one nice guy to another, we are moving on with the show, and I believe we have our next guest on the line.
All right, guys. Joining us on the program is the senior UFC writer for Fox Sports and UFC.com, owner and editor of NerdcoreMovement.com. Of course, his podcast is The Great MMA Debate with Matt Brown, and he is our good friend. We're looking forward to some special memories from New York next weekend for UFC 205. But before that, he comes back onto the program. Damon Martin, welcome back to Submission Radio.
Thanks for having me. And if they think Vegas is crazy, wait till they get to all of us in New York.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be absolutely nuts. And I mean, before we even started recording, we're talking about all the different Seinfeld places we're going to do and some of the secret projects we're going to be doing over there. So I'm very excited. But before we do that, Guys, let's break down this Tony Ferguson, Rafael dos Anjos card, the tough Latin America 3 finale that just happened. I mean, there were some big fights, some interesting outcomes coming from this event. And we'll just quickly go through a few of these fights. We won't go through the whole card. And we'll kick it off at Ricardo Lamas versus Charles Oliveira. Before we get to the actual fight, Damon, when you saw that Oliveira was over by 9 pounds, was a part of you questioning why this fight was even happening?
A little bit, yeah, because when you're 9 pounds over, you really haven't tried to cut weight. I mean, yeah, as a featherweight, he probably walks around at 165 or 170 or maybe even a little bit more than that. But if you're only getting down to that, you're only getting down to 155, you're not really trying to cut weight, which I understand. He took this fight on 3 weeks' notice, and Oliveira has a notorious problem of not being able to get down in weight anyways. But that's just ridiculous, and it kind of sucks for Ricardo Lamas because you kind of felt like he had to take this fight. I mean, he lost out on the BJ Penn main event, and then he was lucky enough to get this fight on just a few weeks' notice. If this doesn't come together, he turns it down. You feel he probably won't be fighting until sometime in 2017. So he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Casper, I'm curious because a lot of people are saying, well, he took the fight on 3 weeks' notice. To me, I don't really think that's an excuse to come in overweight, 9 pounds over. I don't really think that's an excuse at all. But what do you make of that? People saying he took it on 3 weeks' notice, give him some leeway.
No, I don't think it's a valid excuse at all. I mean, if you're going to sign on to take a fight, you need to be professional about it. Fighters take fights on short notice all the time and come in and they drop the necessary weight. It's pretty amazing, and it's definitely not healthy, but I don't think it's an excuse for Oliveira to say, look, you know what, I'm doing these guys a favor, I'm just not going to cut weight. I kind of also thought maybe there's something wrong with him. Maybe he's sick, maybe he's got some kind of injury, maybe he was just like, look, my knee's banged up, something's injured, I'm just not going to be able to do any road work whatsoever. But I'm with Damon. Like, a lot of credit to Ricardo Lamas for taking the fight. I mean, a guy weighing 9 pounds over is huge, but I mean, if he doesn't take the fight, his family's starving for Christmas. Christmas is coming up, there's presents to buy. We had Lamas on the show. We know he's got a zoo in his house. He's got like a dog. He's got a bird. He's got a cat. I think he's got some giraffes. I think those lizards that like old people in Miami have. Harambe is chilling there as well. He needs to buy a lot of food for these animals. And if he doesn't do that, I mean, he doesn't make that money. So Lamas was kind of, he had his back against the wall in a lot of ways, and he really didn't have a choice.
Yeah, to me, it was also, maybe there's a language barrier there between Oliveira and his team and all of us, but I thought the right thing in the situation would be say, look, I fucked up. I was overweight. I apologize. We're still going to put on a great fight. Thanks to Ricardo for taking this fight. But you got a lot of, it was taken on 3 weeks' notice. Not really any apologies. So I think a lot of people were sort of annoyed at that. But let's talk about the fight. Damon, Ricardo Lamas in the first round looked like he was really feeling those extra 9 pounds as Oliveira was energetic and looked very, very good. But he was able to pull it off and get him with that guillotine. Your thoughts on this win for Lamas? Because a lot of people underestimate this guy in the division.
It's a huge win for Ricardo Lamas. I mean, let's not forget how badly he lost that fight to Max Holloway back in June. I mean, that was a pretty lopsided performance for Max Holloway. And then for him to come out there, give up so much weight, and it definitely showed in that first round. I mean, Oliveira looked a lot bigger than Ricardo Lamas and nearly submitted him twice. I mean, he had the Darce choke and then he had the rear naked choke. He fought out of that and then, came back and latched onto that guillotine choke, which is, not easy to do against a guy as good on the ground as Charles Oliveira. So for him to get that win, that's a big deal, because this division is pretty deep, especially at the top. And Ricardo had kind of bounced back and forth between wins and losses in his recent fights. So for him to come out there and get a win and kind of get the moral victory as well, considering his opponent was basically a lightweight going into the fight, it was a big deal for him to go out there and especially to get a submission the way he did.
I think that's what makes the win even sweeter, the fact that he did lose the round clearly in the first round, then he came back to win it. I think the crowd was on his side because of what Oliveira had done. Going into this fight, I actually had Lamas winning. I thought that he would because on the feet, he is a lot better than Oliveira, and if Oliveira can't get it to the ground, then I don't think he would have beaten Lamas. I think in the first round, Lamas sort of, I don't know how smart it was to stay on the ground. I think he should have sort of stood up and kept the fight on the feet where he had a lot of advantages. I think maybe he was a little bit surprised. And he was in some really bad positions in that first round. So good on him for getting out of him. And, this is Oliveira's second submission loss in a row. Pretty much in the same way. Anthony Pettis caught him with that guillotine as well. So obviously, Lamas, who has a very, very good guillotine, did his homework. And essentially it was a come-from-behind win in a fight that I thought he should have won from the very get-go.
Damon, a lot of people wondering what's going to happen with Oliveira next. This is the 4th time that he's missed weight. It is his 2nd loss, but his previous loss was to Anthony Pettis. I mean, these are 2 really top-level fighters. What would you do next, Oliveira? Do you make him go up to lightweight? Could you see a scenario where he gets his walking papers? What do you think happens next?
Well, I don't think he gets his walking papers. I think it's got to be one of 2 things. I think that if he's going to fight at 145, you're going to have to make sure he's getting a nutritionist, whether he's paying George Lockhart or somebody else out there to get his weight under control. I mean, listen, I don't care what the excuses are. If you accept a fight at featherweight, you can't come in 9 pounds overweight. That's ridiculous. I mean, I wouldn't excuse it if he came in 1 pound overweight, but coming in 9 pounds overweight, you're basically saying I didn't try. So he's either got to get a nutritionist to stay at 145 or they got to have him go up to 155 for at least a fight. He fought at 155 before. You know, it didn't really end well for him. He had that really bad knockout loss to Cowboy Cerrone up there. So it's not like he's unfamiliar at fighting at 155, but obviously he would be undersized. But again, you know, I think those are his 2 options. I don't think he gets cut by any stretch of the imagination. He's too talented and still has, you know, a lot of big wins, exciting wins in the division. But if you're going to keep him at featherweight, you got to have him on board with a nutritionist. You cannot let this kid handle it on his own. I don't know if you guys saw, somebody tweeted out a picture where like 3 days before the event, he's sitting at McDonald's or something. I don't know if that was accurate or not, but I was just like, come on. So, you know, either that or you just basically make him fight at lightweight for a couple of fights and then, you know, make him earn his way back to featherweight. But you don't cut him. I mean, he's too much talent there to cut him. But I think something has to be done about, I mean, this is his 5th time he's missed weight. You just can't have it.
And that picture that you speak of, I mean, a bit of a mystery there. Fernanda from MMA Junkie says that it was from a while ago. It wasn't actually from 3 days ago. But if that was from 3 days ago, I mean, that's a pretty crazy picture to put up on Instagram. So I don't think he'll get cut either. But if he goes over to Bellator, this guy would probably become champion. But I'd like to see the UFC do something with him in his next fight. Make sure that he makes that weight. But let's jump over to the next fight. The co-main event of the evening, Diego Sanchez versus Marcin Held. Casper, in this fight, Held did really well standing up. He threw some good strikes, but decided to go for leg locks on the ground, where Sanchez was actually able to capitalize and dominate the fight. We saw that crazy escape from the guillotine that Sanchez did, some kind of crazy sort of monkey jump off the cage. What did you think of Held's approach to this fight, and do you think the fact that he didn't keep the fight standing sort of cost him this one?
Yeah, for sure. I think Diego got into his head a little bit because Held was hitting him with good shots. You know, he was hurting him. He threw a knee. There was a punch that hurt Diego Sanchez. And I think the way that Diego just sort of kept coming forward and wasn't respecting Held's power, I think Held thought, you know what, I'm down 2 rounds. This is in the 3rd round. I need to go for a finish. And I think he went somewhere where he thought he's more guaranteed a finish, or at least has a higher chance of getting a finish than, you know, he basically tried to go back to his bread and butter. But he really didn't have the time, nor did he have, you know, the success or really the skill to submit Diego Sanchez. I think he underestimated Diego's grappling and submission defense. So I think had he kept at it and had he kept sort of chipping away at Diego Sanchez, there's a big possibility he could have hurt him more or maybe even finished. We saw Joe Lozon knocked out Diego Sanchez, and Diego Sanchez hasn't looked, you know, really great in a very, very long time. And I think he definitely surprised me, and I think he surprised a lot of people because I initially had Held, you know, winning this fight. I thought he'd outpoint him.
Damon, for me, when I saw Diego win, I thought, hey, this is great. This is a good performance. Maybe why not retire in this moment? You've had a great performance. You can go out on your own terms. You don't have to be ushered out of the UFC for losing too many fights back to back. It's been a while since you've gotten a big win over a highly touted guy who was high in the odds against you. And your last fight ended the way that it did at UFC 200. Why not go out on your own terms? Were you a bit disappointed that Diego didn't sort of think about retirement after this one? And how much longer do you think he can fight for?
You know, I'm not disappointed he didn't retire because here's the thing. You know, he did have that bad knockout to Joe Lozon, but he is only one more fight removed from a very dominant performance over Jim Miller, who I think is still very relevant, you know, in this division. You know, Jim Miller is, you know, obviously he's bounced up and down a lot too, but to say that Jim Miller is irrelevant would be crazy. So he's 2-1 in his last 3. I mean, yes, the one loss was a bad loss, but, you know, Diego's not done. You know, Diego's probably done fighting the top guys. You know, you don't want to see him in there with a Khabib Nurmagomedov or, you know, any of those top 5 lightweights, but, you know, to throw, I mean, who at this point, just based on their recent records, because he's had a couple of tough losses, are you telling me you wouldn't watch Diego Sanchez, Gilbert Melendez too? I mean, you know, I mean, that's, probably Diego's brain might not like that fight too much, but there's still fun fights out there for him. I'm not going to tell the guy to retire because, for all the damage he's taken, and yes, he has taken a lot of shots over the years, he's had 25 UFC fights. He just got his 16th win. Obviously, that's a pretty good record, 16-9. There's a lot of guys who have worse records than that. So I'm not going to tell the guy to retire. He's 34. If he has a couple of years left in him, good for him. I'm not going to tell him otherwise. And the thing is, he's still winning. I mean, he just took on a 24-year-old prospect in Marcin Held and, basically dominated him for the better part of those last 2 rounds. I don't think that's a case for me to say he should retire.
Interesting what happens with him next. I mean, he fans definitely love him. This was a big win for him. He's got a lot of name recognition. I wonder what the UFC is going to do with him next. But let's jump to the main event, Tony Ferguson versus Rafael dos Anjos. Now, before we talk about the actual fight, Casper, my prediction for this fight was that Rafael was going to beat Tony Ferguson. Now, I thought it was going to be extremely close. But for me, I just couldn't get past RDA in this one. What was your prediction for the fight?
Yeah, honestly, I went back and forth all week on who was going to take this one. There were a few factors like RDA going to a brand new training camp, and we've seen this many, many times. Like Alistair Overeem, he's doing well now, but when he first went to Jackson Winklejohns, he didn't have the success that a lot of people expected. Most fighters, when they move to a new camp, you kind of have this feeling like, oh, well, you're going to take everything that you learned in the past, and then you're going to, add all this new stuff to your game, and you're going to be that much better. And usually it's sort of a work in progress. So I thought that's going to be one thing. But then again, I looked at Tony Ferguson. I kind of thought he's got this crazy high output style where he goes for all these high risk, high exertion techniques. He has great cardio, but he's never been 5 rounds. And then here he is at altitude fighting for the first time. So yeah, I really didn't know how that was going to work out. But I'm like you. I had RDA winning. I thought that if anything, with Tony and his recklessness, I thought there was opportunities for RDA to either clip him, and he did. He clipped him a lot of times in this fight, or, Tony going for something, rolling for something, and then ending up on bottom and then losing rounds that way.
Yeah, well, it was a super impressive performance from Tony Ferguson. And I mean, RDA brought it in this fight, no doubt about it. Now, if he had Cordero in his corner in between rounds, maybe gave him a bit more advice, Brian Stan kept repeating it throughout the fight, maybe that would have been helpful. But he did bring it. He looked great, but Tony Ferguson was just able to outwork him in those rounds. Damon, give me a breakdown on this fight. What did you learn about Tony Ferguson from this one?
Well, I learned a lot about Tony Ferguson. First off, I learned that, he's ready for anything and he's ready for anybody because, while he had picked up some big wins and some impressive wins over guys like Edson Barbosa, this was really his first deep dive, into the top 3, into the top 4. He had a couple of fights with Khabib that got canceled, unfortunately. So this was kind of his chance to jump up in the division. So that was part 1. Part 2 was, we learned something after the Lando Venata fight because he got tagged pretty hard a couple of times by Lando Venata and obviously got rattled. And you start to wonder yourself, man, if you hit him on the button, will he go out? Well, somebody will be able to do that. And Dos Anjos tagged him hard several times, and Tony just basically walked through it. I think that tells me that Lando, really surprised him. And I think Tony probably underestimated him considering that Lando was taking that fight on such short notice, was such an underdog, and was such a kind of a no-name guy going into it that Tony pretty much, I assume, thought there was no chance he was going to get hurt, and he allowed himself to get tagged up a little bit. This time he knew it was coming. He was prepared for it. And Dos Anjos just couldn't hurt him. I mean, he threw everything at him and the kitchen sink, and Tony just kept coming forward. So I think that relentless pressure, the ability to go through, some hard shots from his opponent, and the fact that he went out there and did it in 5 rounds. He didn't get a finish this time, which Tony has kind of become known for, which is good. But I think you need those 5-round fights to really show that you can kind of grind it out. I mean, that was a close fight. I mean, it was 48-47. It wasn't a blowout. He had to grind through it and get some big rounds. So I think we learned a lot. I think what we learned more than anything tonight is that Tony Ferguson is a championship fighter.
I would agree, and I had it even going into the 5th. I think that it was 2 apiece, and I think that 5th round is really when Tony Ferguson, turned it on and brought it home, and good for him. I'm super happy for the guy because he's been overlooked for a long time. I think with Tony Ferguson, he's got this aspect and this sort of ability, which is a double-edged sword. He takes punishment very well. He has an amazing chin. RDA obviously hits hard, and he was able to take everything that RDA was, willing to bring, and there was no times where he was seriously rocked or seriously hurt, but as fun as that is to see and, aesthetically pleasing and it makes for great fights, it can get you into trouble sort of later down the track. And if you do get a guy who surprises you and there's a shot that you don't see coming, that could end badly. And I'm kind of not a fan of fighters doing that, and we had Robin Black on early, and he talked about the future of the sport and where fighters are going, and I feel like Tony Ferguson, he's a man of the future and he's a man of the past, in the sense that he's got a training camp that is completely all about him. He's got all these crazy, dynamic, new moves. He surprises people. He's very creative, but he still embodies the spirit of sort of the old school fighters where, it's about who is tougher. And there's a lot of times in fights where he sort of wants to get into like a dick swinging contest and say, you hit me, give me all that you got. And, that's something that can bite you on the ass later in your career or any time in the fight. Having said that, great performance. Disappointed that he didn't call anyone out, but I think regardless, Tony's the guy that deserves the next title shot. We don't know what's going to happen with McGregor Alvarez, but he's definitely the next guy. When you look at Khabib and Michael Johnson, these guys are two great guys, but Khabib, hasn't beaten guys in a while, and Michael Johnson just recently, a lot of people were calling him off as a contender. So I think at the moment, Tony Ferguson beating a guy that was the last man to hold the belt, he's by far the most deserving guy. And I know you hate that word, Damon, and so do we, but let's say deserving, for lack of a better term, for the next title shot.
For me, I think I'm going to wait till UFC 205 to see how this Johnson Khabib fight goes. What about you, Damon? Are you sold on Ferguson as the next person to get the title shot, or do you want to see what happens next weekend?
I still want to see what happens next weekend because, listen, Khabib is undefeated. He mauled, RDA when he fought him. I mean, yes, it was a couple years ago at this point, and obviously injuries and a lot. I mean, RDA has fought like 7 times since then or whatever. So a lot's happened since then. But, I was at that fight, and that was just a one-sided beatdown. I mean, Khabib took him down and just pretty much mauled him on the ground. So I want to see what Khabib does against Michael Johnson, especially considering what Michael Johnson did to Dustin Poirier in his last fight, and knowing that Michael Johnson has gone with some of the best guys in the world. Michael Johnson, he is a legit, top 5 or top 6 lightweight, and I think that speaks volumes about that. So, for Khabib to go out there and dominate him, to finish him, to maul him, makes a really strong statement. And, don't forget, Michael Johnson has a win over Tony Ferguson. Now, granted, it was 5 years ago, but he does have a win over Tony Ferguson. So I'm on the wait and see approach. I want to see how Khabib does against Michael Johnson before I crown anyone the true number 1 contender.
All right, fellas. Well, speaking of UFC 205, it's prediction time. It's time to give the people our thoughts on who's going to be winning the titles next weekend at Madison Square Garden. And of course, I'm not talking about the buffet title because we all know I'll do it. The turkey skin, the skill behind asking a chef to get that takes a lot of balls. I'm not sure many people would want to do it. So let's talk about the actual fights though. How I'm going to do it is because I know sometimes it's easy to sort of fall in a pattern or somebody gives a prediction and you're like, yeah, this person's prediction is good. So we're going to do it in a way that I'm going to break down these 3 fights in a way that a different person's going to give their prediction first for each one. So for Joanna and Carolina, I'll begin. But for Woodley and Wonderboy, we'll get Casper to begin. And for McGregor Alvarez, we'll get Damon Martin to begin. Don't worry, I'll dictate the whole thing. It won't get too confusing. But this way, maybe it'll be a bit fresh. And maybe it's a terrible idea. We'll see by the end. It'll be interesting. Now, I'm going to kick this prediction off. Joanna Jedrzejczyk versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Guys, for me, Carolina looked great against Rose, but with Joanna's Muay Thai, the fact that I felt like Carolina got hit quite a lot by Rose when she came in, I don't think she could do that against Joanna. I think Joanna's striking will just be the difference. I think around the 2nd or 3rd round, she'll hit her with some significant strikes, and towards the 4th round, I believe she'll finish her. Carolina has good footwork, but to me, and she also has a good clinch. She's great in the clinch. But to me, I believe Joanna's just better all around. I think she will beat her. Even though the length is there for Carolina, I do think Joanna's going to take this one. Damon, who do you think is going to win between the women at UFC 205?
I like Joanna to win. I won't say in a rout. I think that's disrespectful to Carolina, but I do think Joanna's going to dominate for the most part. Carolina's a slow starter. I think that's where she could maybe take advantage of Joanna a little bit, the way that Claudia Gadelha did. She came out quick out of the gates and was able to, kind of put a hurt on Joanna early. Carolina typically doesn't do that. She's a slow starter, and Joanna's a bit of a slow starter as well. So I think that Joanna will take over 2nd, 3rd round, and I kind of agree with you. By the 4th round, I think we could see her put her away. I like Carolina very much. I just don't think she can hang with Joanna Jedrzejczyk over 5 rounds.
Yeah, I feel like this is Seinfeld. Can't we all like these ladies. Can't we just bet that everybody has a good time, everybody has lots of fun? Honestly, I feel like Carolina, she's very, very good, but Joanna is kind of like a better version of her. Like, Carolina's good in the clinch. She's got slicing elbows and nice knees, but Joanna can be devastating in the clinch. We haven't seen that with Carolina, you know? Carolina hit Rose with some good shots, and she really pounces. She's got good killer instinct when she sees that her opponents are hurt. And, you know, Claudia was able to hurt Joanna, so that's an opening that might, you know, open up for Carolina, but I don't think Carolina has the power to truly put Joanna in that situation. Joanna's also the more accurate striker. She's the busier fighter. Carolina, you know, she likes to stay at range and then sort of hang on the outside. She uses good footwork and lateral movement, but there's also times when she stops and is stationary, and that's when she gets hit. And kind of like what Sean Sheehan said before, she gets in, but she's a little bit slow in getting out, and I think that's going to be the difference maker. I think that's where Joanna is going to be able to hurt her. I'm gonna live life on the edge, boys. I'm gonna say third round TKO, and I think it's gonna be standing because Carolina's extremely tough. How's that?
Well, there you go. Because you're a bold man, Casper, you are the next man to begin our predictions. Tyron Woodley versus Wonderboy Thompson for the welterweight title. Take us away. Who's winning that one?
I hope he said bold and not bald, because this hair is so thick I can barely get a comb through it. Seriously. Wonderboy versus Woodley. This is going to be a great fight. Woodley is very, very contrasting his fights, though. There is no gray area with him. He either shows up and looks amazing and scary, like against Jay Heron or Koscheck or Dong-Hyun Kim or Robbie Lawler, or has a very tough and uninspiring performance like Jake Shields, McDonald, or against Gastelum. You know, he's incredibly physically gifted and a phenomenal talent. He's almost flawless takedown defense, great wrestling, and on any given night, he can knock anybody out that he touches. I think, unfortunately, though, most of those strengths can be nullified. Thompson, who can, you know, stay out of range of his big knockout punches. He can use footwork to evade Woodley's takedown attempts. And let's be honest, as good as Woodley's takedown defense is, no one's really expecting Thompson to try and take this to the ground. So there's also the fact that even though he hates hearing and he disagrees, Woodley's cardio, it's still a question at best. You know, he's only been in the championship rounds once, and he got brutally knocked out against Nate Marquardt. I think Woodley's best chance is to surprise Wonderboy with his speed and ability to cover distance. If he can close the gap, maybe fake a takedown, go for a big punch instead, he might be able to hit Wonderboy clean enough to sort of end his night. But I think that theory works better against a guy who would be, you know, a simple sprawl and brawl fighter, whereas Wonderboy, he's more likely to step out of the way of takedown attempts and use footwork as opposed to a traditional sprawl, and so, you know, therefore his head would be off-center. Worth noting is also that decisions are not often Woodley's friend at this level of competition, whereas Thompson is comfortable with having very patient and disciplined game plans in 5-round fights. So ultimately, I think Wonderboy takes this by decision. It's been a long time since Tyron was finished, and I think it's more likely that Tyron gets into a defensive shell in the later rounds rather than opening himself up and getting finished. So I think we're going to see a new champion.
Okay, wow, there you go. Well, you know, guys, I was been watching a bit of Wonderboy footage, and he is hittable. If you have a look at an Ellenberger fight, even have a look at the Hendricks fight at the beginning, he can get hit, and I think the big problem with it is, even though he's a spectacular striker and very, very good at what he does, his style is still keeping your hands down at the bottom, which still gives his opponents an opportunity to land that sneaky strike. So with Woodley, we saw what happened with Robbie Lawler. He came out there, he hit him with that shot out of nowhere. There's a very, very good chance at the beginning of the fight, Woodley can hit Thompson on the chin. He's explosive, he's dangerous. You don't know, it could happen. But, I mean, all signs to me are still pointing that Stephen Thompson is going to avoid that, move around, use his footwork, and eventually win this fight against Woodley. I see this finishing later on. I don't see this finishing early. I sort of see Woodley taking this in the third. I see it as a TKO. But again, I feel like Woodley's very, very dangerous here, and Thompson needs to be careful at the beginning and needs to stay away from those punches. What about you, Damon? How do you see this going?
I think Tyron Woodley's still being very underrated, which is disappointing considering the way he went out there and knocked out Robbie Lawler. And he has had some big performances in the past. I mean, when you look at the fight with Carlos Condit, I mean, yes, there is the controversy because Condit got injured, but he was dominating the fight to that point. I mean, Woodley went out there, got right in his range and took him down, put him on the ground, overpowered him. You know, that was a very dominant performance from Tyron. It's just unfortunate that it ended the way it ended. But I also agree with the point that, Tyron is one of those guys who either shows up or doesn't. There's no middle ground with Tyron. He doesn't eke out decisions. He either comes out there and puts the hurt on somebody quick, or, he typically doesn't show up, and you have that fight like he had against Rory McDonald, where he basically stood against the cage for 15 minutes and got beat up. I think that is more likely what we're going to see here, because I think Stephen Wonderboy Thompson has improved his takedown defense so well, working with guys like Chris Weidman, and his takedown defense, as we saw against Rory McDonald, who is actually a pretty darn good wrestler. Obviously not as high level as Tyron, but he, very long rangey, very tall, long welterweight with good takedowns. And he couldn't come anywhere close to taking Wonderboy down. I think that was a big statement for Wonderboy. And I think if he can stop those early takedowns from Tyron, because I think Tyron will come out and try to be a little bit of a wrestler here to try to put Wonderboy on his back, punish him a little bit, make Wonderboy think about throwing those kicks out of fear of the takedown. But if he can't get that takedown and he exerts a lot of energy in that first or maybe second round trying to get the takedown, I think as the rounds move forward, we're going to see Wonderboy take over. And it's going to look a lot like that fight with Rory McDonald, where he kind of traps him. Woodley's kind of deer in the headlights a little bit, and he starts to pick him apart. And I think Wonderboy finishes him late fourth, early fifth. I think just over time, Woodley's conditioning is questionable. It is suspect. No matter how many times he tells us it's not, it is. And I just think that over time, Wonderboy will start to put together the combinations that will hurt him, and I think he will get the finish, and I think we will have a new champion.
Well, Mr. Damon Martin, the main event, the big one. This is the super fight everyone's been waiting for. McGregor versus Alvarez. Title on the line. Will McGregor become the double champion, or will the train crash? Everybody cries. It doesn't happen, and the world just explodes. I mean, this is days after the election as well in the US, so who knows what's going to be going on there. It could be apocalypse, and then McGregor's the cherry on top. What's your prediction? Who's winning this one? Who's coming out on top?
Man, you put the pressure on making me go first on this one. I tell you what, because I'm so torn on this one, because I've gone back and forth so many times, because when the fight was first made, my initial instinct was Conor McGregor, because I think his accuracy, his length, and his ability to mix up the strikes. And Eddie, unfortunately, has had defensive struggles in the past to where he gets hit a lot, or he has gotten hit a lot, because he gets into these brawls a little bit, and it costs him. He gets beat up a little bit. And I think he's had to fix that style. That's why we saw him kind of grind against Anthony Pettis and not go out there and just try to wing punches, because I think he could probably win that fight, just based on the fact that he's a very powerful striker and a very good boxer. But, he took away that risk by just kind of grinding Anthony Pettis into the cage. I think knowing that he's fighting Conor, I don't think Eddie will allow himself to do that. I think he wants to go out there and really punish and really hurt and put away Conor McGregor. And I think that game plan can be dangerous, because when you start playing that game, you do what Dustin Poirier did, which he went out there and just started winging punches with Conor, and not necessarily throwing, caution to the wind necessarily, but he didn't go out there with a tactical, technical game plan, and he got caught, because Conor is a very precise striker. He's a very long striker. I believe he's going to have, I want to say, about a 3-inch reach advantage, if I'm not mistaken, in this fight. Or I know he has the reach advantage, and he has a little bit of a height advantage as well. I think Eddie has to avoid that brawl. On the flip side, though, Eddie Alvarez is such a big, strong lightweight, and he's also so good and has so much experience. I mean, Eddie's been here. Eddie stood in 50,000 seat arenas in Japan and fought Japanese fighters. He's fought the best of the best. He's got over 30 pro fights. I mean, this is the thing about a guy like Eddie Alvarez. This is a different beast. When we talk about durability with Nate Diaz, if you're looking at Nate Diaz as maybe the most durable guy at 155, I would say he may even be a runner-up to Eddie Alvarez, who is so incredibly durable and so hard to put away. And I think that does not bode well for Conor McGregor, because when Conor can't put somebody away in those first couple of rounds, he fades a little bit. And I know he's talked about all his, his conditioning and all the work he's done to make sure he's ready for 5 rounds. But, I still have questions about that. He got beat up pretty good in that 5th round by Nate Diaz. All that being said, I think that the momentum that Conor's on right now, and I think the head games, as much as Eddie has tried to ignore them, I think they are in his head. Not necessarily that he's in his head in a bad way. I think he's in his head to the point where Eddie is going to make a mistake, because he's going to come out there and he wants to knock out. He wants to hurt Conor McGregor. He wants to end this hype train. He doesn't want to just go out there and win. He doesn't want to grind him out, which he could do. I think he could do. Absolutely. He could grind out Conor McGregor for 5 rounds. The problem is I don't think he wants that. He wants to go out there and prove a point. He wants to make an example out of this guy. And I think that's where it comes back to bite him. So I'm going to go with Conor McGregor by TKO. 3rd round is what I'm going to pick. But I tell you what, though, my decision in this one is totally up in the air. You could talk to me when we get to New York. We're sitting down talking Seinfeld, and I could have a completely different pick.
I think we're all on the same page. And big ups to Damon Martin there for bringing in the X factors into the breakdown. The interesting thing about this fight, and I've been going back and forth a lot as well, both men's strengths are the other's weakness. Alvarez's wrestling, Conor's suspect takedown defense, Conor's KO power, Alvarez's tendency to get hit and hurt in fights. I watched the Pettis fight the other night with Eddie Alvarez, and Alvarez actually spent a lot of time on the outside of the, close to the cage, picking his moments, staying close to the cage. That's not somewhere where you want to be against McGregor, who likes to use pressure and footwork to trap fighters and go to work when their back hits the cage. On the flip side, Nate Diaz, in their fight, was able to get Conor against the cage and hold him there for, extended periods of time. If Eddie can get Conor there, he's going to be like glue, and he will probably do a lot better job than Diaz at keeping Conor there. I think McGregor will use a lot less spinning kicks and capoeira kicks in this fight, as that's when Alvarez was able to capitalize and take Pettis down. Really look for those moments and opportunities when Pettis threw risky kicks. So I think that's kind of out the window in this fight. Maybe instead of spinning kicks, Conor's going to throw roundhouse kicks or those snapping front kicks like against Chad Mendes. I think in general, Eddie will try and use McGregor's forward pressure against him and wait for him to sort of commit to a strike and try and time it with a takedown, or at least clinch and put him up against the fence. I think if Eddie does go to the ground, I think he might be conservative to not risk losing position, at least for the first couple of rounds, and I think he'll try and sap McGregor early, and in the later rounds, if he's having success, he might try and make McGregor give up his back for a rear naked choke, or even go, to full mount and go for an arm triangle attempt. I think ultimately one of the biggest keys, you mentioned Eddie's tendency to get hurt a lot and hit, and I think against McGregor, it's not something that you really want to do. I think even though opponents have been able to close the distance on McGregor in the past, I think if he's able to execute his game plan properly, McGregor will show a more mature version of the Chad Mendes fight, where this time he doesn't stay in the pocket and egg Alvarez on to hit him. He'll be more calculated and stay on the outside. I think he learned from the first Nate Diaz loss and not risk being unnecessarily clipped or taken down. So essentially, I think McGregor wins it. I think if he's going to do it, he's going to do it in the first 2 rounds. And I say that very unconfidently. So if you're looking to put money on this, definitely don't go by my prediction. But my official prediction for now is Conor McGregor in the 2nd round, or the first 2 rounds.
For me, the big question going into fight week will be, where are these guys mentally going into the fight? I think for me, that's going to be a key factor, because like you guys mentioned in your predictions, what kind of Conor McGregor are we going to see? What kind of Eddie Alvarez are we going to see? Are we going to see an Eddie Alvarez that wants to be careful and wrestle and take McGregor down? Or are we going to see an Eddie Alvarez that just wants to run across the cage and try and take McGregor's head off? And then vice versa with McGregor. Did he learn from those from the first Nate Diaz fight? Or will Alvarez somehow get under his skin in this fight, that he goes out there and just tries to blast him? And we know that McGregor is smarter, but after reading John Kavanagh's book, I sort of got the impression that Conor McGregor still sort of does what Conor McGregor wants. And even though Kavanagh wants him to listen to his instructions, there have been times when McGregor hasn't listened to those things, and there have been emotional situations where he's been pissed off or unhappy about something and wanted to do his own thing. So I'm going to be curious if they do end up in that situation in the pocket where they're both swinging as hard as they can. And of course, like you mentioned, Casper, you'd think that McGregor would knock Eddie Alvarez out. But like you mentioned, Damon, Eddie Alvarez has been in some tough wars before. He's super durable. What would that mean for Conor McGregor? Could Conor McGregor get knocked out by Eddie Alvarez by some kind of hook or super straight in that pocket? To me, that's going to be very, very interesting if two guys just throw away all strategy and just end up in that ring, in the pocket at some point, throwing punches at each other. But, otherwise, I think the strategy should be for McGregor to stay on the outside, use those leg kicks, wear Alvarez's legs down, use pinpoint striking, and really get this thing done. And Alvarez needing to use his wrestling. I wonder if he's going to be able to get Conor McGregor down. We saw they had really, really bad injury going with Chad Mendes. I wonder where his grappling's going to be at now. But I will have to say, right now, my feeling is like you, Casper, there's going to be a TKO in this fight. But for me, it's going to be a lot earlier. I'm predicting that Conor McGregor is going to finish this in the second round via KO. They're going to get in the pocket. Things are going to get wild. And he's going to end up hitting Alvarez with shots that he won't be able to take. But I might change, like you, Damon, I might change my prediction over the next few days as I see where these men are mentally.
Do you think that at this point Tony Ferguson may have the right mindset? When he was on our show, he sort of hoped that they would both end in a double KO. The way you describe it, Dennis, where they're both swinging in the pocket, both men have KO power, both men durable, and this is to Damon as well. Is this a more than likely scenario than at least for a first time in a long time where this might be a double KO?
Mm-hmm. I don't know, but I'll tell you this. I was listening to the conference call, and Conor McGregor was really chilled out at the start of it. And then Alvarez was just saying a few things, and it felt like he sort of got under Conor McGregor's skin a little bit, or McGregor might have been like, oh, look, this is kind of a shit conference call. I'm going to turn things up and start talking shit. But I'm curious how Eddie Alvarez is going to handle this trash talk, because so far he hasn't been absolutely terrible. And if he does get under McGregor's skin, then, yeah, maybe you do get this wild, wild west shootout with both guys that try and knock each other out. And, yeah, both guys could come out pretty hurt out of it. And also, I don't know, he just fought UFC 202 against Nate Diaz. That was an absolute war. I'm just wondering where exactly he is physically, because Eddie Alvarez got a pretty quick win over RDA, and here he is. That was in August. Now it's November. So, yeah, I'm just wondering where he's going to. What about you, Damon? You hoping for that double knockout?
I mean, anything's possible. Like I said, I think more than anything, as I said earlier, and I really do believe this, I don't think Conor's in his head at all. I don't think he's in Eddie's head, but I think Eddie has it in. I think Eddie's in his head, in his own head, saying, I want to go out there and expose this dude. I want to go out there and make this guy look like a fool. I want to go out there and make everyone realize that Conor McGregor is nothing but hype. And that's a dangerous game to play, because Conor McGregor is good. I think this whole idea that he's somehow all hype is just garbage. You don't knock out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. You don't beat Chad Mendez. You don't beat Nate Diaz. I don't care if it was a majority decision. Nate Diaz is an incredibly tough guy. You don't win the fights he's won and be a bum. I'm sorry. You're just not. So I think if Eddie is underestimating him and feeling like he just needs to go out there and smoke this guy, it could come back to bite him. And that's one of the reasons why I'm picking Conor, because I really, truly do believe that's what Eddie's thinking.
And I also noticed that Conor sort of gives Eddie respect. Like we saw in the conference call, he said, he's a tough fighter. He's fought a lot of tough fights, blah, blah, blah. But like you mentioned, Damon, Alvarez is sort of like, he hasn't done anything. He hasn't really beaten anyone. And I don't know if he truly feels that way, or if he's just trying to get under McGregor's skin. I wonder, because, I mean, what McGregor was able to do, there's no doubt about it. The fact that they beat Jose Aldo in the way that he did absolutely gives him credibility. But I still wonder if, and I guess we're going to try and follow this up with Eddie when we're over in New York and we're asking him questions. I wonder if he legitimately does not respect what Conor McGregor has done in the sport and thinks this guy is chump change compared to everybody else. I wonder that. But yeah, I mean, look, we'll have to wait and see what happens next week in New York. Now, guys, before we're going to wrap things up, just quickly, over here down in Australia, everybody was super disappointed when they found out Luke Rockhold was no longer going to be headlining UFC Melbourne against Jacare. Unfortunately, he had a knee injury, had to pull out. And the new main event, I mean, I suppose it was always on the card, so it wasn't really added, but Robert Whittaker versus Derek Brunson. A few disappointed fans. We were disappointed as well. It was always going to be a great fight to watch. I was really excited to see what was going to happen in this rematch. And also a very important fight for the middleweight division. But Casper, what was your reaction when you saw Rockhold was off the card?
Yeah, bummed. It happens. I mean, another AKA fighter hurt. I mean, at this point, it's not really that surprising. The other sort of big issue is that this was a pretty thin card. Let's be honest. It's not a stacked card. In some ways, it almost makes UFC Utah look like the more well-rounded card. This is a very strong card locally, but internationally it has very little appeal. I mean, once Rockhold was out, there wasn't really many other options. People were saying, well, put Robert Whittaker in against Jacare. If you're Jacare, why would you want to take on a guy like Robert Whittaker, who is, a dangerous guy who may cause the upset? I don't know if you would, but, has the ability to cause the upset. Whereas you're Jacare, you've essentially earned a title shot, or at least up there in the top sort of 2-3 people who deserves a title shot. It doesn't make sense if you're not fighting Rockhold, and if you're not guaranteed that, a win over, Robert Whittaker will get you the next shot, you're out of there. And then a lot of people saying, well, why don't you bring Michael Bisping in? He was obviously wanting to fight GSP. He wanted to fight UFC 206. Bring him in to fight Jacare. And it just made absolutely zero sense. Look at what Michael Bisping was doing these past few weeks and months. He's been going for these big money fights. GSP, big money fight. Nick Diaz, big money fight. And he wanted to do it on a pay-per-view where he would get a pay-per-view share, cut of the money, which is great. I mean, in the latter stages of his career, he wants to make enough money to provide for his family. But if you're thinking that he would actually do that, go up against a much tougher guy in Jacare Souza on a little fight night card on the other side of the world in a fight where he wouldn't get any of the pay-per-view revenue. And in general, it's a card that, while it means a lot here in Australia, would very much fly under the radar. You're crazy. It was never going to happen. So unfortunately, what played out was really the only viable option. Like you mentioned, Dennis, Mousasi would have been great to fill in there. He was booked against Uriah Hall for another card that almost fell apart, the UFC Belfast card. Anderson Silva, I mean, sure, we can dream that he's going to come down, but not only does he not want to fight Brazilians, he's not going to fight on a fight night card. So it's a big bummer, and I feel bad for the people who bought tickets when only one fight was announced, and that was Rockhold and Jacare. That was probably, if you're not an Aussie, the most intriguing and sought after fight on that card, and now it's gone. So I feel bad for the fans, but if you're an Aussie, just still go down and come down and support and enjoy the local fighters.
Yeah, I will say, because UFC Belfast, that's in tatters right now as well. I will say, like you said, Casper, if you're a local fight fan, if you're a fan of the UFC, there's a lot of Aussies on this card, which will it'll be like a little bit of a party at Rod Laver Arena. I really do think Rod Laver Arena is still a really, really good place to have the UFC, so you guys should definitely come down. Even if you have a crap ticket, you'll have a great view. It's going to be a lot better than Etihad Stadium. And also, I'm not sure when the UFC is going to be back in Australia. Right now, we're waiting for the schedule to see what happens next year. We know that a lot of great people from the department, like Tom Wright, have been cut, that have made things happen here in Australia. And there's this feeling that there's going to be a lot less fight night cards happening next year. So who knows if Melbourne's going to get another card next year. I reckon go down, support your fighters, and have a great time doing it. And also, you get the great UFC production. If you guys haven't been to a show before, you get the great sound, the big noises, the cool screens, the cool entrances. So it's definitely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for fans there in Melbourne. So don't miss out. Check it out anyway and support all the Australian fighters on the card. And this Robert Whittaker-Derek Brunson fight, it will be a great fight. No doubt about it. Tim Kennedy was talking about how much of a beast Derek Brunson really is. So it's going to be exciting to see whether Robert Whittaker can beat him or not. But Damon, before we wrap this up, everybody knows Nerdcore Movement, fantastic website. A huge, huge movie recently came out, Doctor Strange. I was reading your review before, but as you know, me and Casper like to do movie reviews on the program. The rating system is in Timothy Johnson mustaches. So, sir, before we wrap up, out of 5, before we wrap up, Damon, give us the Doctor Strange review and give it out of 5 Timothy Johnson mustaches.
I loved it. I thought it was very well done. I grew up, obviously I'm a huge comic book fan. I actually grew up, I literally couldn't care less about Doctor Strange. I didn't really like the character. I didn't really like his abilities. It just didn't really appeal to me that much. And kind of the same way like Ant-Man when it came out, I just didn't really care. But when I saw the movie, of course I'm going to go see it because Marvel does such a phenomenal job. And I tell you what, they killed it once again. The origin story was phenomenal. It's very close to the original material, but obviously kind of updated for a little bit newer 2016 audience. Benedict Cumberbatch was spot on as Doctor Strange. He did a phenomenal job from the early goings as a doctor all the way to becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. The effects were amazing. It's a very trippy movie. If you're into drugs, I'm not suggesting you take drugs, but if you're into drugs, this is a very trippy movie. Everything was just spot on, picture perfect. This is a great introduction to a character that not a lot of people knew going into it. I would say on the Timothy Johnson mustache scale, I would say it's a strong 4 out of 5. The only reason I wouldn't give it 5 out of 5, only because once again, the one failing that Marvel continues to have a little bit in their movies is the villain wasn't great. Not a bad villain, definitely not a bad villain, just wasn't the kind of villain where you're kind of like after you leave the theater, you're talking about both the hero and the villain. Didn't really get that with this film. So that's the only reason I'd knock it down a little bit, but it's not a bad knock on the movie by any means. So 4 out of 5 would definitely be my rating.
Where does the villain rank compared to the Scoutmaster from The Simpsons?
What's funny about it is Marvel movies, if you watch Marvel TV shows on Netflix, like when you watch Kingpin, Vincent D'Onofrio, phenomenal. When you look at David Tennant doing Kilgrave on Jessica Jones, phenomenal. Watching Mahershala Ali doing Cottonmouth on Luke Cage, phenomenal. They also have a lot more time to build up these villains. The only really good villain in Marvel so far has been Loki, honestly. I'm hoping they finally introduce Thanos a little bit more because he's supposed to be the big bad guy in Infinity War, but we've barely seen him. We've seen him literally twice. So I hope they introduce him a little bit more before Infinity War comes around in a couple of years, because that's the problem. That's the only problem Marvel's had, because they haven't really created super compelling villains in their movies. They've done a good job at the movies themselves, but none of the villains have really stood out besides Loki.
What about Russian Mickey Rourke?
Now, we kind of forget about old Whiplash. I don't know if we want to talk about it. What's funny is the best villain in the entire series, in my opinion, has been Iron Man going up against Captain America in Civil War. That was the best one. Now, you could say Baron Zemo, who kind of no spoilers, sorry. Baron Zemo, who was in that movie, actually was phenomenal. He just wasn't the main. He was kind of the antagonist, but he wasn't, obviously the entire conflict was between Captain America and Iron Man. So depending on which side you were on, you could say Captain America was the best villain or Iron Man was the best villain. That was really the best conflict they ever had in the movie, in their movies. And I would say the same thing about Winter Soldier in the Captain America movie with Winter Soldier. But yeah, none of the traditional villains, like Ultron really didn't do much. None of the Thor villains have been that good. Iron Man, any of the Iron Man villains, as good as the first movie was, none of those villains have really stood out, in my opinion.
Well, at least they're better than the DC villains, who are the people who created the Green Lantern and Batman vs Superman. Curse those people. And Ben Affleck, because apparently the new Batman script looks like shit. But guys, let's wrap this up. I was going to go on a whole tyrant about Mafia 3 on the PS4. We've run out of time, so I'm just going to basically say don't buy it. It's shit. Get 0. How about that? 0 Timothy Johnson mustaches out of 5, because I wasted my time on that crap. I want to thank Sean Sheehan, Tommy Toehold, Robin Black, and of course yourself, Damon Martin, for coming on the program. Guys, make sure to follow Damon on Twitter at Damon Martin. We will be at UFC 205 next week. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to have heaps of content coming to the channel. Don't miss out. The only way you're not going to miss it is by subscribing to the channel. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And no official show next week, but we will be at the show. So there's going to be heaps of preview shows, breakdowns, a few fun things with Damon, a few fun things planned. So keep an eye on our social media so you don't miss out. And apart from that, don't be afraid to use your nails, boys. We'll see you in New York next week.